Welcome back, legends. This is Animemonster Pro. Today's story is, what if Harry Potter mastered ancient magic, and found the love that changed everything? Here's a quick glimpse. Harry Potter breaks free from Dumbledore's control, embracing his metamorph abilities and training to become a force to be reckoned with. Along the way, he discovers an unexpected love with Tonks, proving that strength and love can thrive together. Before we dive in, if you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Animemonster Pro and share it with your friends. Let's start the story. Harry Lewis was staring into the bar, debating about whether he should go in. It was a rather clever spell that his contact had used on his new ID card. The card showed Harry to be whatever age he wished at the particular moment. So Harry knew he would be served without trouble, but he was still wary of allowing himself to lose such control. Aside from the dangers in doing so, he simply didn't like to not be in complete control of his own person, a result of have no control for much of his childhood. He suspected it was this stubbornness that helped him resist the imperious curse, and the lesson had been driven home with serious death because he had been unable to control his own mind. And yet, right now he didn't want to be inside his own head. The letter that was currently burning a hole in his pocket drove him further into the dark room. Some things could only be dealt with at the bottom of a bottle. He made his way to the bar and glared at the bartender. "Give me a glass of the strongest thing you have. Actually, give me the whole bottle." He woke up, groggy and confused, in a dank bathroom that smelled awful. Pulling himself up, with a great amount of effort, he took a look in the mirror to assess how bad he looked and shouted in shock at what he saw. His hair was a vivid green. Unfortunately, the movement caused by his shock didn't sit well with his stomach, and he had to dive quickly for the toilet. He spent several minutes being violently ill once more and cursing the alcohol he had drunk and the letter that had driven him to drink it in the first place. He also vowed to never allow someone to hurt him enough where he reached this point again. It wasn't worth the pain, or the hangover. When he pulled himself up once more, he was in for another surprise. This time, his hair was a shade of brown, strongly resembling his favorite dish of curry at the Indian restaurant around the corner. He sank to the floor, deciding he would have to figure this out later. After his head stopped pounding, that is. After all, maybe it was all in his head. He had drunk a rather large amount of alcohol the night before. Once Harry had gotten over the hangover and his appearance had returned to normal, it didn't take him long to figure out what was most likely happening. He only wondered why it had never happened before. After all, Tonks had been changing as a small child, she had once told him. Then again, he knew that Tonks had been raised with the knowledge that she was a metamorph, whereas Harry hadn't even known about magic. He wondered if that had anything to do with it. He had come to the conclusion that maybe he simply wasn't as powerful a metamorph as she was. Of course, he had no way of verifying this. The metamorph gene appeared to be extremely rare. He had only been able to find mention of it in a handful of books. There were no reference books entirely devoted to the craft. And nothing he had been able to find had helped him at all. The only time he had noticed a change was that night he had gotten completely smashed. Although, he was aware of the fact that his hair seemed to have a mind of its own. It never grew, and he couldn't seem to get it to change its style. Even the strongest Muggle hair gels wouldn't hold for more than 5 minutes. It had completely baffled the hairstylist he had gone to upon first arriving in New York, and nearly given the rather eccentric man a coronary. The man still called every couple of months, asking Harry to come down to try a new method of hair control. None of them had ever worked. No, it seemed that the only way to learn how to morph, if it didn't come naturally, was to be taught. And, as Harry only knew one metamorph, and he had no desire to announce himself to Dumbledore in his order, he needed to find someone else to help him. There weren't a lot of magic users in New York City, he knew. The dense population of Muggles didn't lend itself well to magic users. There were just too many people that could see something. But there were magic users in the States. He wondered if he could get them to help him, if being the boy who lived would open doors here as it might have in Britain. While he was extremely reluctant to do it, he realized that he really needed to learn this new skill. He had it for a reason, and he knew how useful it could be. Of course, he also recognized some of the downsides. He had spent quite a bit of time thinking about what this would mean for him, and how he would deal with it, assuming he ever mastered the skill. It had been a rather interesting young girl who he had met while training that had taught him the most important truth. She was a muggle, but she showed up with a different hair color every couple of weeks, and seemed to have dedicated her life to finding new places to pierce her body, or new images to get marked on her skin. Harry had been shocked when he first met her, but she just smirked at him and asked if he had a problem. When Harry furiously shook his head, she had given a nod. "Good," she replied. "Because this is me, whether you like it or not. If you can't deal with that, then you don't deserve to be my friend." Harry had thought about those words quite a bit, and he had grown to agree with her. If he was a metamorph, then he was a metamorph. Nothing could change that, and so anyone he associated with would simply have to accept it. As he watched the hurried walkers that rushed past and the insane traffic on the street in front of him, Harry decided that he would go to the United States Department of Magical Affairs and ask about getting help. But first, he needed to see if he could actually perform any of the spells he had spent the last year meticulously learning the theory behind. He would never again walk into a situation unprepared if he could help it. Flashback. July 7, 1996. Harry smiled as he stepped out onto the street, nodding at the doorman. It had taken him days to get used to the fact that no one seemed to pay any attention to him here. He was just another kid, and an interesting one at that. The relief this brought was wonderful. But it had also made him wonder. From what he knew, only Hagrid and Sirius had been to Godric's Hollow the night his parents died, and no one knew for sure what had happened there. So how was it that the entire wizarding world knew that he had somehow defeated Voldemort? How was it that everyone knew about his scar? And how was it that as he grew up, everyone seemed to know what he looked like? The only conclusion he could come to was that someone wanted everyone to recognize him. This seemed remarkably stupid. If Dumbledore really wanted to protect him, he should have let everyone think it was someone else, or that Harry was blonde, or anything other than the truth. At least until he had grown up enough to protect himself. Then there would have been no need for the Order to follow him around, there would have been no curious stares wherever he went, and Harry could have gone through school without any extra attention. Only Voldemort would have known any differently, and any Death Eaters he told wouldn't have been able to leak that information without revealing their hand. Harry shook his head. He really needed to stop thinking about the conspiracy to make him miserable. If there even was one, it was possible everything was just a horrible coincidence. It didn't do any good to think about, and he was free of them all now. He snickered as he imagined the various reactions when they found out that he had disappeared. He wished he could be there to see it. If he had been thinking more clearly, he would have set up some way to do so, but he had long ago realized that the days following Sirius' death were mostly spent in a fog of anger, depression, and fatalistic despair. He wandered down the street, following the directions he had scribbled on a piece of paper, until he came to a dreary-looking building with a black and white sign. Martial arts was all it said, but he had been told it was the best in the city. It was one of the reasons he had chosen his home, as he wanted to be close. Taking a deep breath, he entered the small front room and smiled at the wizened old woman behind the counter. "Hello," he greeted quietly. "How I help you?" she asked in a heavily accented voice. "I want to learn, as much as I can." A smile came across her face. "We see how right you are." And she waved him into the back. "You claim to be a metamorph, Mr. Potter. I have a hard time believing that you would have been able to keep this quiet. You have led a rather, heavily spotlighted life until the last year." Harry met the man's look head on. "Yes, sir. I was unaware of the ability myself for many years. Though I have had hints, if I had been paying attention. No, it wasn't until this last year and a rather interesting evening that I was displaying obvious signs." Harry shrugged. "But I have a theory for this. Either I am not a very strong metamorph, or my magic masked it due to my rather strong desire to not display any talents setting me apart from the crowd. For most of my life I was punished for anything that made me different, and so I learned to simply not stand out from the crowd. In addition, I simply didn't know it was possible until 2 years ago, so I never really tried until recently." The ministry official chuckled. "If you had come to me a year ago, I would never have believed that you didn't like the attention. But you seem to have done a rather good job of hiding under our very noses, so I find myself inclined to believe you. I wouldn't have thought it was possible for the boy who lived to live here for over a year without us even suspecting, but the evidence speaks for itself. Now, You are asking for our help in finding a trainer, is that correct? Yes, sir. Are you aware that the only known full metamorph at the moment is Nymphadora Tonks? I believe you even know her. Harry had trouble masking his disappointment. Yes, I know her. Well enough to know she would happily murder you for uttering her first name. I was hoping to find someone less, shall we say, connected to certain individuals. The official burst into laughter. Ah, it isn't every day that I get to hear of Harry Potter's dislike of Albus Dumbledore. It's rather like Robin growing a sudden distaste for Batman, you understand. Harry grinned. Yes, but only if Batman had stolen Robin from his home, had him beaten and abused for 10 years, put his life in danger simply to see what he would do, and lied to him his entire life. By the expression on the official's face, Harry rather thought the man was startled that he even recognized the reference. Of course, Harry also recognized that he was being rather harsh on the headmaster. He doubted that the man really had it out for him, but it was hard to be objective when it is your life that is being messed with. In addition, there was little harm in playing on the sympathy of the man you were asking help from. Well, that certainly puts a different spin on things. The man eyed him carefully, assessing him. There is a way around this issue. Harry sat forward, eager. Yes. In similar such situations, it is common for individuals with rather special talents to receive training under their ministry's Department of Mysteries. It is then customary for them to offer their own services if another ever appears. We could put in a request, through the regular channels, for Miss Tonks to come train a new metamorph. As we are rather distrusting of your ministry at the moment, we would be well within our rights to require an unbreakable vow from her to protect your identity, skills, and person. Do you think she would do it? She is rather needed in England right now. Ah, but Miss Tonks owes us. You see, she herself was trained under an American metamorph when she was 7 years old. Harry's eyes lit up. Oh, he considered this. It was tempting. Can you place the request and get the vow without telling her anything about me beforehand? We will only inform her that you are male, your age, and that your talent is only recently discovered. Brilliant. And Mr. Potter. Yes. Do be careful. We are rather fond of you on this side of the pond as well, you know. Flashback. March 2, 1997. Harry stood in front of the large mirror in his bedroom, taking in the man looking back at him. He looked nothing like he did a year ago. He was still a bit short for his age, and he definitely didn't have the body of a weightlifter, but it was evident in every move he made that he was powerful and deadly. His sensei had actually mentioned how surprising it was that Harry had so completely adapted to this new form of life. That was high praise from the small man. But the highest praise Harry had received was currently wrapped around his waist. Sensei had actually smiled proudly when presenting him with the black strip of cloth. With a satisfied sigh, Harry slowly changed his clothes, hanging them reverently in his closet and laying the belt carefully across his dresser. He had worked hard for it. Most days he spent a good 4 or 5 hours in the studio, working until the exhaustion forced him to stop. Then he would come home and read until he could no longer keep his eyes open. Only rarely did he allow himself a break. Usually he spent his days off exploring more of the city, or simply sitting in the park, watching the children play. They reminded him of exactly why he was doing this, and of the future he still hoped to find for himself someday. It was a powerful motivator. Deciding today would be spent on healing spells, he grabbed a book from the shelf and headed out to his balcony. He would read in the sun for a while. Absolutely not. He refused to lose such a valuable resource. Nymphadora's skills made her irreplaceable. Sir, I really don't have a choice. He smiled indulgently. Of course you do, Nymphadora, there is always a choice to do what is right over what is easy. His eyes twinkled merrily as he issued one of his favorite sayings. It really sounded so well, he was glad he had stolen it from that silly muggle all those years ago. It's not like the man was important anyways, some silly man named Winston. Albus wondered what his mother had been thinking to give him such a name. He probably amounted to nothing, like most muggles. Her face remained stoic. No, sir, I've already given my vow. What? The old man's expression was incredulous now. Why would you do such a thing? It was the only way they would let me leave the building without obliviating me. And, really, it is my duty. As I was trained by someone, I will pass it along. I realize the timing is inconvenient, but think how useful another metamorph could be. But he is American. He would have no desire to come here to fight. He was getting desperate now. She honestly seemed to think she could leave him in the middle of a war. He might, if he becomes at all fond of his teacher. Albus Dumbledore sighed. I wish you had thought this through a bit more, my dear. She met his twinkling blue eyes. I did. And I'm leaving tomorrow. Damn her. Very well. Are you sure you won't be able to tell me anything about him? He sent a tendril of legilimency forward and was met by surprisingly strong walls and Nymphodora's frown. No, sir. As England is a bit riled up at the moment, they demanded an unbreakable vow from me. I cannot betray my student in any way. Then good luck, my dear. Please let me know as soon as you think you might be able to come back. And do be careful. Yes, sir. He watched her go with a heavy sadness falling onto his shoulders. The war was not going at all well, and it was only going to get worse now that Tonks was leaving. He wondered if Remus would hang around, now that both Tonks and Harry were gone. It hadn't escaped the headmaster's notice that the marauder was often watching the young Auror. Of course, nothing had come of this. She seemed to not even notice, as if her attention was always on something else. And, really, the man was 16 years older than her. Any such relationship would be difficult, but the fact that Tonks was so young at heart and Remus so world-weary would only make the disparity worse. Albus wondered what else was going to go wrong. Harry had left and hadn't been heard from for nearly a year. The most talented member of the Order was leaving for an undisclosed amount of time. His potions master had been increasingly left out of Voldemort's plans, and, if his sources were correct, those plans were centered on killing him before Voldemort made his bid for the country. And, even though he knew they were fighting an unbeatable foe, without Harry there to end the war, Albus had still been trying to win, but he had only found vague hints in his search for Tom's Horcruxes. Albus wondered if maybe it wasn't time to devote all his efforts to this search and give up on finding Harry. Prophecies had been wrong before, after all. Nymphadora Tonks had mixed feelings as she made her way to the portkey office at the ministry. She was incredibly excited about the discovery of another metamorph, as she had often wished to have someone who truly understood her. And yet, the timing was inconvenient. If it had been a child found, she would have asked for a delay before training started, but it wasn't. Another adult metamorph could be a huge asset, and she was hopeful that the training wouldn't take as long as it would with a child. She was also curious. All she knew was that he was male, 17, and only recently discovered his abilities. She took this to mean he probably had very little potential, as she had been morphing uncontrollably since 3 days after she was born. And it was so strongly tied to her emotions originally, she couldn't imagine someone being a metamorph and not knowing it. It was actually a relief to think he wouldn't be able to do much. Full body changes would have been awkward to teach. Usually, metamorphs are taught young, before nudity becomes an issue. But she would be working with a 17-year-old male. She had little hope for his ability to control himself. And worse, he was close enough to her age that she was worried about her own reactions. It really would be so much better if they never had to deal with it. She could teach him the basic changes without any awkwardness, and hopefully that would be the end of it. Due to the fact that she had been morphing her entire life, she really didn't remember a time when she didn't know what she was. Her mother had raised her to understand her morphing, and accept herself as she was. She was incredibly grateful for this. She could only imagine if she had learned what she was as a teenager. She didn't know if her self-confidence could have taken the hit. As it was, her teenage years had been incredibly hard. Honestly, her adult years hadn't been much easier. She had just gotten better at hiding its effect on her. Her training had been complete before she ever went to Hogwarts, and her natural excitement meant that she never tried to hide what she was. The first few years at school this just meant that she got odd looks and people calling her a freak. She didn't have many friends at school. She had gotten along okay with Charlie Weasley originally, but even he had a hard time once puberty set in. Because then it suddenly dawned on every boy in the castle that she could make herself look like anything they wanted. At first, she had enjoyed the attention. During her 4th year, she had dated anyone that asked, and made a bit of a fool of herself. It had taken a year for her to realize that every single one of them didn't want to date her. They wanted to date a Vila, or a supermodel, or the Ravenclaw prefect that wouldn't even look at them. She had come home after her 4th year completely destroyed. She had even asked her mom to find a way to bind her ability. But Andromeda Tonks was no pushover, and she had slowly and calmly restored Tonks' faith in herself. Tonks realized that she simply needed to find the right man, instead of dating them all. So 5th year started and she refused every offer. Of course, that was when the girls started in on her. They didn't like that she was getting so much attention, even if she never went with the guys who offered. They didn't like that she could always be prettier than them, even if she didn't often take those forms. And teenage girls are some of the cruelest creatures on the planet. She had been forced to learn how to ward her bed, as what started out as pranks quickly turned into malicious harassment. She lost any interest in trying to find friends, and spent all of her time working hard on her school work. She would show them all, and be the best there was. And, indeed, she was one of only a handful of people admitted into OR training in the last 10 years. But even then the harassment didn't stop. She had thought that once she got out of school she could try dating again. She figured older and more mature men were the way to go. And for a while she let them have their way with her. Until they started insisting she enlarge her beeps, change her face, shrink her waist. She was starting to think that all men were pigs. For a while she had thought that if she found a mature enough man it would be enough. She had even considered going after Remus Lupin. He was a good man, and not bad to look at. And he certainly knew what it was like to be harassed and hated. For a few months the summer of 1995, she watched him carefully, trying to decide whether or not she wanted to proceed. It took nearly 3 weeks to notice the pattern. His attention to her changed depending on her look. When she went with some of the crazy looks she preferred, he would shake his head and look away. When she looked older and more staid, his eyes would follow every move she made. He only wanted her when she conformed to his way of thinking. He was just like all the rest, only he wanted something different out of her than the others. But it discouraged her that he, too, wanted her to change for him. Tonks had sworn off men after that. She had only ever encountered one male whose attention wasn't directly tied to her look. His interest in her morphing has always been awe and curiosity, not lust, and he had treated her the exact same no matter how she looked. It had been amazingly refreshing. It was such a pity he was unavailable to her. She sighed with resignation as she took the portkey. One day, she would find someone who could accept her for who she was, instead of what she looked like. August 5, 1997. You are Nymphadora Tonks, the metamorph. The pink-haired young woman scowled. Why was it so hard for anyone to understand that she hated that name? Yes, though I really prefer to be called Tonks. It's such a horrible name, you see. The man didn't respond to this statement. You have made your vow. She growled at the hooded figure. Yes, I really wish it weren't necessary. I hate vows, you can never know all it includes. The figure chuckled. You have no idea, Tonks. Her brows furrowed. At least he had dropped the infernal name, but now he seemed to be taking the mickey. What did he know that she didn't? So, are you going to take that hood off? I am supposed to train you, am I not? And where are we going to do this? Here. She looked around the small room. It's rather drab, though I suppose I can spice things up a bit. Another chuckle. She had to repress the urge to growl angrily at him. To ease your mind, I will give you my own vow. He pulled his hand out of his large cloak and extended it. The rather forgettable ministry official in the corner stepped forward, wand drawn, to be their binder. I swear to never knowingly cause physical harm to Nymphadora Tonks, outside of training-related injuries. I swear to protect her interests and secrets, insofar as they do not directly contradict my own. I swear that my interests run towards the same goal as hers, and that I will use her training to further these causes. She watched as the bands of magic sealed the vow, slightly surprised that he would not only swear such things, but know what would be important to her. After all, they had never met before and he knew nothing about her. She withdrew her hand and clapped excitedly. Well, let's get this show on the road. He laughed softly. Always so eager. Take my hand. Where are we going? She quipped. Her eyes were trying to pierce the shadows surrounding his face. The way he talked, she would almost swear that he knew her. Come to think of it, wasn't she supposed to be training an American? His accent was definitely English. Home. It is safe. was his simple answer. She didn't know if it was only because of the vow he had given, or if she would have trusted him without it, but she allowed him to apparate her away. The room they landed in appeared to be the sitting room of a rather impressive-looking flat. There were huge windows on one wall overlooking a lovely park, and all kinds of Muggle entertainment equipment along another wall. "Where are we?" "New York City." He pointed out the window to a rather remarkable view. "That is Central Park." "Ooh, this must have cost a fortune." They bounced towards the window to get a better view. Possibly. I traded in a home that I inherited for it. I needed a place to, get away from things. Too many girls chasing after you. I had a similar problem. Not exactly. I did not discover my metamorph abilities until this last year. No, I came here a year ago for very different reasons. Well, seeing as how we're stuck together for a fair bit, you might as well tell me. His hands came up to the hood of his cloak. "I'm sure you can figure it out for yourself," he whispered, just before lowering the hood. And promptly had to duck the spell she sent at him. "Who are you really?" she growled. "Really, Tonks? Do you think it is possible to trick an unbreakable vow?" Her wand still leveled between his eyes, she examined him carefully. "No, but Harry Potter ran away from home a year ago and no one has seen him since." "True. I had my uncle drop me off at the travel agent's place on the way home from the Hogwarts Express. They were happy to be rid of me. Shortly after, I was here, and I've been here ever since. I didn't use a bit of magic until my birthday a week ago, but I've been keeping myself relatively busy nonetheless." He grinned. "Now, are you going to get around to asking the secret questions so you can drop your wand?" She growled at his cheek. "Fine. When was the first time we met? What was the most requested morph while staying at headquarters? What form does your Patronus take? How were your godfather and I related? And what the hell have you been doing for a year? You were part of the advanced guard to bring me to headquarters, located between number 11 and number 13 Grimmauld Place. The summer before my 5th year, you broke a dish in the kitchen, alerting me to your presence. I believe it was a pig snout. Last I checked it was still a stag, after my father's animagus form. Sirius and your mother Andromeda were first cousins. They were both stricken from the family tree for behavior unbefitting a black. And if you'd put your wand away, I'll sit down and tell you." Her wand had been dropping slowly with each answer. Finally she huffed and stalked over to the large couch. "Fine. Get on with it." Her eye twitched when a very familiar owl swooped into the room and landed on Harry's shoulder. It was the final proof she needed that he was who he said he was. Well, quite a bit of time was spent on physical training. She grinned slightly. "I can tell. Yes, well I've reached Yoden level in Bujutsu, I'm quite good at capoeira, and a mob hit man has been teaching me to work with knives. He keeps trying to get me to work jobs with him." She held up a hand. "Mind explaining a couple of those words?" He chuckled. "It means I'm a 4th level black belt in a style of Muggle martial arts. And rather proficient in a South American mix between fighting and dance." "And the mob, Harry? Are you insane?" "I certainly hope not. But that's a long story for another time." "Fine. What else?" "I have enough books to make Hermione green with envy, and I've pretty much memorized most of them. I knew I couldn't practice magic, so I studied the theory for hours at a time. Then I practiced the movements with a stick and accuracy with a paintball gun. I think my occlumency is pretty good now, and all the spells I've tried over the past week have worked perfectly." She sighed. "Okay. It seems you actually have been smart about this. But why, Harry? Why did you leave? And why didn't you tell anyone?" Harry was rather shocked at the expression on her face. It seemed she genuinely cared about the answer. Maybe she wasn't as under Dumbledore's thumb as he had thought. Because everyone should have the chance to decide their own path in life. "The only way I would be able to choose mine is by leaving." "There's more. Of course there is. But that's all I'm going to say for now. I swore a vow, Harry. I can't betray your confidence. It's not that. I'm just not comfortable talking about much of it. But you will be eventually. Probably." He gave a half grin. "You have to realize, Tonks, that the only people I've even talked to in the last year are my teachers. I'm not exactly good at this people interaction thing." "Fine. Now, what's this about? You being a metamorph? I think Dumbledore would have mentioned something like that. True, if he knew about it." She threw him a dirty look. "Well, I've always had this thing with my hair. You mean how it looks like a right mess? Yeah, there isn't anything that can tame it, and believe me, I've tried. But more than that, it hasn't grown an inch longer than this in my life. And if you cut it, it's right back to the same look the next morning. That sounds promising. And then, shortly after I got here, I may have gotten a tad drunk. She rolled her eyes. It was only the once, as it's not an experience I relished, but that was a bad day. Anyway, I woke up with green hair, puked some more, and found it had turned curry brown. It went back to normal when my hangover left. And you haven't had anything else change? No. I've read every reference I can find, and tried everything I can think of, but nothing. This could be difficult. But we'll get it. She paused and tilted her head to eye him. What made that day so bad? He tensed, but she simply waited for him to answer. He didn't really want to, but figured she wouldn't have asked if it wasn't important to discover the reason behind his largest morph to date so they could replicate it. Finally he started, with a sigh. I got a letter from Ginny that day. He dragged his hand roughly through his hair. I had been writing her all summer, along with Ron and Hermione. I guess we had been flirting a bit, and there had been talk of seeing each other, but she changed her mind. It was right after school started, and everyone found out I had run away. She said that I must be a coward for running away from my problems. She said that even if I did come back, she didn't see how we could be together. She wanted someone who faced their problems head-on, instead of hiding when things got difficult. She said that I must not be the person she thought I was if I could simply walk away and leave the war behind me. Oh, Harry, you know she probably didn't mean it. Believe me, she meant it. Tonks doubted this. She knew the redhead had a fierce temper, and she also remembered what it was like to be a 15-year-old girl. She had often found herself saying things in the heat of the moment she didn't really mean once her head had cooled down. But she didn't think she could get Harry to understand that. He had never really been a kid, and so didn't understand what it was like to be one. But she could change her mind. She doesn't understand the pressure you were under, and you know she has that temper. She just needed time to cool off. His face went hard. No, Tonks. She made her choice. If she couldn't allow me to do what I have to, then there is no future for us. I learned this year that the person you were with has to accept you for who you are completely, no matter what. I had thought, but it doesn't matter anymore. I've come to the conclusion that she wouldn't have been good for me. My brain is too old for my own body, and Ginny, despite being a wonderful girl, is still a girl. I don't think romance is for me until the end of all this. It would be hard for me to be with someone when I'm worried about surviving and saving the world and she is worried about gossip and essays. Tonks sighed. She didn't think he was being entirely fair to Ginny, but she understood how the young girl, in a fit of Weasley temper, could have said enough to cause this reaction. Okay, Harry, I understand. She bit nervously on her lip before continuing. You know, it is just going to get worse with girls, right? He gave her a confused look. What do you mean? Well, you already get all this attention for being the boy who lived, but it will be so much worse once you defeat Voldemort. You mean if? She smacked the back of his head. Don't say that. Sorry, Tonks. You'd better be. She gave him a stern glare and fingered her wand, as if to remind him not to say such things again or he would get worse than a slap on the head. Now, what I was saying is that as a boy, you only had to deal with fangirl attention from girls around your own age. But the man who defeated Voldemort is going to be pulling it in from every woman under the age of 50. And it will be even worse if they find out you're a metamorph. Her eyes flashed with pain for a moment. Is that what happened to you? He asked softly. Yeah, I didn't think to hide what I was when I first went to Hogwarts, as I was so excited about showing it off. By the time I was a fourth year, the boys started coming around. Eventually, every single one of them asked me to change. Some wanted me to turn into a specific girl they were pining after. Some wanted me to become their idea of the perfect woman. Some just wanted me to enhance certain features. But every single one of them asked. Harry placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Tonks. She gave him a small smile. Not much use being sorry, is it? It's already happened. I know. But you didn't deserve that. Those guys were idiots. Ah, thanks, Harry. Did you ever think about what would happen if you did fall in love? What do you mean? Well, I mean, I've thought about it some. If I was in love, I think I'd like to look better for her. Get a bit taller, bulk up some, and other things. She grinned. That would be convenient. He glared briefly. I don't know, I guess I hadn't considered that I might want to change for him. How would I know he loved me for me? Well, I imagine if he really did love you, he would love you in whatever form you took. Some just might be more pleasurable during certain times. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. I'll have to get back to you. She jumped up off the couch, pulling Harry along with her. He gave her an amused smile. Now, let's get to the interesting stuff. I want to see if I can push you into unconscious morphing. Okay. What do you want to do? Well, might as well make it useful. As seen in your previous experiences, the only time you morph is when you are under extreme duress, so I need to replicate that. How do you feel about a duel? Sure. Magic or muggle? Ooh, both. Harry laughed. You're one of a kind, Tonks. Don't ever change. He missed the look on her face as he had already turned and was walking away. Come on, I'll show you my training room. Shaking her head in awe at the young man before her, she followed after him. It was obvious that his room was used more for working out than spellcraft, but she flicked her wand and found that he had added most of the standard wards to protect it. Good job on the spells. Is it all right if I add a few more? Sure. Which ones? Her wand started moving in intricate patterns, but she narrated as she worked. You have the basic protections for the room itself, and built-in cushioning charms, but this one will help prevent injury in its walls. You can still get hurt, but it minimizes it quite a bit. She paused as her wand began a new sequence. This one will help absorb some of the residual magic. I know they track things differently over here, but we still don't want them to know how much magic we are using. She took a long pause before taking her wand and touching it against his chest, then against her own. And that one will alert me if you get seriously injured in here when I'm not here. He cocked his head to the side, considering her, and trying to figure out why she would do such a thing. But he didn't ask her. Instead, he took a step back and drew his wand. Shall we? Tonks watched him carefully as he moved around the kitchen, humming slightly, fixing them dinner. She was slightly astonished to learn he enjoyed cooking, but was prepared to try it first before insisting that they always get takeout. Their duel had been interesting, to say the least. He was clearly lacking in experience, but he moved so fluidly and quickly she had problems tagging him with a spell. And then, he would pull some obscure piece of magic out that she hadn't even seen before. His magic tired much quicker than his body, and he resorted to muggle fighting more and more. Here, she was clearly outmatched. What had been the most interesting, however, was that his movements were always so close to her and graceful, without ever actually hurting her. Though she had no doubt that he could, if he wished. And he regularly caught her off guard, only to let her out of his trap. She wondered if this South American fighting style he mentioned was responsible for his grace, and vowed to watch him fight someone else to see. She had called a halt to the fighting eventually, and demanded that he show her how he was always able to dodge so effectively. With a grin he had done so, unashamedly taking her and manipulating her body. She had taken the opportunity to show him some combat morph skills. Many of the things he showed her, her current form had trouble performing, so she merely changed it subtly. Harry had been in awe. He wanted to see exactly what was going on, so she had transfigured her clothes to a skin-tight suit that allowed him to more clearly see each change she employed. He had watched diligently. Curious, she had faintly enhanced her chest to see if he would display the typical male reaction. He had instantly noticed, and turned to her with a mock glare, telling her to stop playing around and get back to work. She had a hard time hiding her pleased smile at this reaction. It made her consider his early words about relationships, maybe he was onto something. Do you like mushrooms? He asked, pulling her out of her thoughts. She shook her head furiously. No, can't stand them. Okay. What about artichokes? She gave him an odd look. No idea. He gave a cheeky grin. Great. You get to try something new tonight. He turned back to his chopping. What are you thinking about so seriously over there? She wasn't about to tell him the truth, but found an answer anyway. Trying to figure out what is blocking your morphing. It is highly unusual for a metamorph not to display obvious tendencies early on. In fact, every story she had ever heard about another morpher stated quite clearly that they had been doing so since shortly after birth. Harry stiffened slightly. Well, who's to say I didn't? I mean, it's not like the Dursleys would have told me if I was doing magic when I was a baby. They would have tried to pretend it never happened. And before that I was pretty isolated. I could have been morphing from the day I was born and no one would have known. But I think it more likely it would have started when I was at Privet Drive. It only would have taken one time of me changing in front of them for the Dursleys to tear into my hide. You mean you could have been morphing as a kid, but they would have simply ignored it? More like punished me for it, as it probably would have made them hate me even more. In fact, I might have learned not to morph because of their reactions. Oh, well, that's a possibility. So we need to convince your magic that you won't get in trouble for morphing. Maybe. She considered this. Well, we could use positive reinforcements. Promise you rewards for every successful level of morphing you achieve. He looked over his shoulder at her. But what? I have everything I need. Everything. He turned back to his work before answering, and she suspected it was so she wouldn't see his facial expression. Yeah, aren't you lonely, Harry? He stiffened slightly, but didn't turn around. Course not. You're here now. And I like being on my own. It's the only time I don't have to pretend to be someone else. She could understand this quite well. I'm not talking about friends. He paused again and looked at her in complete confusion. What? She had to resist the urge to roll her eyes. Men were so dense. And adorable, but mostly dense. Have you ever been with a girl? He gave her a blank look for a minute until he figured out what she was talking about. Then his expression went hard. I told you, I can't do romance right now. So don't. But that doesn't mean you can't have a little fun. He glared at her. You should know me better than that, Tonks. Fine. I'll find something, though. Have at. Now, how do you feel about garlic wine sauces? Over the next few weeks, Tonks followed Harry to all his regular hangouts, completely enamored of the big city. He took her to his studio and she watched in wonder as he systematically destroyed the 3 fighters they had set against him. At the same time, then he took her to a rundown playground in a rather interesting neighborhood, and she watched him dance around and mock fight the others there. She was in awe. It took him 5 days to convince her to let him introduce her to his mob contact. Surprisingly, she liked the sly man, and allowed him to show her several tricks. The man reminded her much of Moody, only without the limp. In the eye, though somehow he still seemed to be able to see behind his back. She hadn't quite figured out how the Muggle could do that. She also insisted that Harry show her the real New York, and so at night they would explore the teeming city and its many clubs and restaurants. In addition, she was convinced that getting him a girl would help the situation. Tonks watched him carefully, trying to see when he had a strong reaction to any of the many women that swarmed the handsome young man. She was completely flabbergasted when he ignored them all. He did, however, always let her know that she looked nice, and maintained a careful presence near her to dissuade the many hangers-on of her own she gathered. It was endearing that he was so protective of her. She had pushed him through any scenario she could think of to try and force his morphing, to no avail. He simply displayed no evidence of a change. So they spent time instead dueling and teaching each other as much as possible. She had never enjoyed herself so much. Harry had long since determined it was a serious mistake to agree to Tonks helping him. If she had actually been able to teach him how to morph, he might have found it worth it, but instead he was slowly being tortured with no sight of any returns. He knew she was trying to get him a girl, that had been fairly obvious. But Harry simply wasn't attracted to any of them. Sure, he recognized that many of them were pretty, but he knew it would take more than that. He was so complicated, that it would take someone with more than just a pretty face to understand him. He needed someone that was strong, a fighter that could keep up with him when the craziness of his life forced him to fight. He needed someone who could snap him out of the depressing thoughts it was all too easy to slip into, and remind him of the good in the world. He needed someone who was truly his equal. There was also the small fact that none of the women he saw held a candle to Tonks, no matter what face she wore. And hence the torture. He had always known that Tonks was special, and she had always been beautiful, but it had been different when he first met her. He had just been a naive kid and she had seemed so much older then. She had been an unattainable fantasy. But now he was acutely aware that she was only 6 years older than him, and that he was a kid no longer. Her fire and zest for life entranced him, and balanced out his morose and brooding moods quite nicely. And her ability to always be positive was remarkable to him, because he had to often struggle with the same. He found that he was enthralled by what form she chose to take every day, and constantly wondering what had made her decide on certain changes. He tracked regular things such as hair and eye color, trying to use it to understand her moods better. He wondered what had made her sad on days when she took a more subdued form, and how she found the strength to keep being so excited about life on the days she became eye-catching. It never seemed to bother her if he was the only one who ever saw her. She still took great delight in changing everything about herself regularly. But the more time he spent with her, the better he was able to always recognize Tonks under the changes. He was fairly confident now that, even in a crowd, he could pick her out no matter what she looked like. Despite the way she had been treated by guys her entire life, Tonks seemed to love to have the attention of all the males around. This certainly included him, and he wondered how much of it was intentional. He knew that she enjoyed using her body to tease him, but maintained rigid control on his occlumency training to ensure that nothing of what he was feeling or thinking ever escaped. She insisted that they go out regularly, and it was always sweet torture to watch her dancing in the clubs. The way she moved enticed him like no one else ever had, and he was amazed that in all her careful watching of him she hadn't realized that he was always watching her. Or the Neanderthals that constantly surrounded her. He routinely had to use force to keep them away from her. He had started applying mild repelling charms every time they went out, and had even resorted to several confundus charms. He had seen for himself what types of men lurked in the dark clubs of New York City, and he refused to let any of them near her. He had thought many times that it would be better for his peace of mind to send her away, but he could never bring himself to do it. Recalling his life before she came, it seemed dull and dreary and he had no wish to return to it. Whatever else could be said about Nymphadora Tonks, the color she brought to his life was undeniable. Tonks was practically bubbling with enthusiasm over the new club that was opening tonight. The DJ had excellent reviews, and she couldn't wait to go. But it had taken over an hour to convince Harry, and that was without telling him that the club was a little, kinky might be the right word. Harry's mood had darkened more with each day since she had been there, and she thought it would do him good to get out and enjoy himself. Not that he ever did. She sighed in frustration. She was bound and determined to get him a girl tonight. The boy needed a good round in the sack more than anyone she knew. Maybe if he wasn't constantly worried about her he would pay more attention to all the girls that were eyeing him up. She would have to do something about that. He offered her a genuine smile when she strolled out of her room to find him standing waiting for her, dressed in dark jeans and a black shirt that hugged his torso and showed off his fairly impressive physique. They took a cab down to the club, as she didn't want to walk that far in her boots. She loved them, but the heel got uncomfortable after a while, and she wanted to be able to dance at the club tonight. But they certainly looked good with the short skirt she was wearing. They were able to get in fairly quickly. It was hard for any man to refuse Tonks anything if she really wanted it. Tonks liked what she saw inside. The club was decorated with bright colors that matched her personality, and was teeming with life already. There were raised platforms throughout the large room, each with dancers on display. Tonks had to resist chuckling when she saw Harry's face when he first caught a look. She doubted that he had ever seen someone wearing quite such an outfit. The music was pulsating throughout the room, and she found her hips moving almost without thought. She convinced Harry to dance with her, carefully eyeing the crowd for the ladies that were paying particularly attention to the handsome man by her side. There was a cute little redhead dancing nearby that she thought might do. And based on his interest in Ginny, she assumed he liked red hair. The girl was also eyeing him speculatively as they danced. Tonks' eyes scanned the club again, looking for someone to distract herself with. There was a tall blonde man behind them that looked like he would do nicely. She winked at him and smiled when he returned her look. She turned back to Harry and pulled his head down so that he could hear her over the loud music. "There's a fellow over there I want to get better acquainted with. You should amuse yourself. There's a cute redhead over there that's been eyeing you since we came in. I'm sure she'll keep you plenty entertained." His body stilled as she spoke, and then he pulled back. He stared at her with an unreadable expression on his face for a moment. "Harry." Her eyes widened in shock as his hair flashed red and his eyes went black. In an instant, they were back to normal and she was blinking in shock when he leaned down to speak. "Sure, Tonks. Have fun." I don't feel much like dancing tonight, I might just head home. Tonks watched, still too shocked to speak, as he walked stiffly away. His hands were clenched at his sides as he quickly made his way out of the club, and the crowd parted before him. She wondered if it was just the expression on his face, or if his magic was seeping out. She felt a hand on the small of her back and looked up, startled, to see the blonde she had been eyeing earlier. He pushed on her back, trying to pull her into him, but she just shook her head. She needed to think, and this wasn't the place to do that. She pushed her way through the crowd and into the bathroom in the back. Once there, she quickly apparated out. Harry had shown her the park when she first arrived, and she fell in love with Turtle Pond. So she quickly found a seat in the deserted Delacourt Theater that overlooked it. Her mind was in turmoil. Harry had finally morphed, and it was because of her. All this time she thought that he only morphed under conditions of extreme physical duress, but now she wondered. Both times she knew about had been when he was rejected by a girl, though her rejection had been done unconsciously. So maybe it was more about emotions. But he had controlled it almost instantly, not letting on to his distress. Maybe that was the key. Harry maintained rigid control of his magic at all times, and it only slipped when his emotional equilibrium was seriously upset. That gave her several new angles to try with his morphing. But first she had to sort out how she felt about this new development. She had always known that Harry was an exceptional boy, and she had been in awe of him for years. But when he pulled that hood off a couple of weeks ago and she saw the new and improved Harry Potter, she had realized that he had changed. She knew, of course, that he was now considered a man, but she had been careful not to let herself think of him like that. She knew how easy it would be to follow the path of almost every other girl in England and fall in love with the legend. She respected him too much to do that. Of course, then he had to go and show her that he was so very different from that legend. Over the last few weeks she had learned things about Harry Potter that completely astonished her. And he was always so caring towards her. She had even told him things she had sworn never to reveal. But she was so comfortable with him it didn't bother her that he knew her long-kept secrets. Still, she had never allowed herself to look at him as a man. She kept that careful distance in her mind to protect herself. And Harry seemed to be of the same mind. He had even flat out told her that he couldn't do romance right now. Then again, his reasons had all been geared to girls his own age. The same wouldn't apply to her. She was perfectly capable of taking care of herself, and he knew that. Then she considered her own objections to a relationship. Harry had managed to convince her that she might be able to find true happiness in a man, and shown her how a man truly in love would deal with her morphing. In fact, she was a little surprised she had never realized this herself. So that took care of one of her objections. He might very well be interested in such with her, because based on his reactions tonight she knew he must feel something for her. Her initial reaction had to been to classify it with the crush that most boys and men seemed to have on her, which was intimately tied to her ability to turn herself into anyone they wanted. But she knew Harry, and she didn't think he would ever think of her like that. There was also the fact that Harry always looked at her the same way. She hadn't thought, before tonight, that it was with any particular interest, but there was no doubt how he had reacted tonight, and that led her to believe that he must have thought that way about her for most of the last few weeks. No other man had ever acted like this, having the same reaction to her no matter how she looked, besides her father. She allowed herself to consider, for the first time, the idea of being with him. She was certainly attracted to him, and it wasn't just about the way he looked. Which was good, considering that his look would hopefully be shifting about a bit soon. No, she could understand what he had said about liking a metamorph in any form. She pictured him with changes, and they were all appealing. Harry's most attractive feature was his aura, not his looks. She was also, she had to admit, insanely attracted to his fighting skills and the very way he moved. She could sense the power and force in him, and it was appealing in a way she had never felt before. And even the way he thought about life served to ground her usual exuberance. Her attitude would serve as a balance to his moodiness, and yet she knew that she was not all lightheartedness and goofing off. She could be serious when it was needed. Yes, she admitted, they could be good together. So now the question was, would she allow herself to go there? And to this she had no easy answer. Harry was cooking breakfast the next morning when Tonks wandered into the flat. He looked up and gave her a smile. How was your night? She wondered if she was imagining the tightness about his eyes. He certainly hid it very well. That just meant she would have to push harder. She smiled brightly. Good. Oh, I'm glad. He didn't really look it, though. Right now, he looked more like she had remembered him looking before, when the world was against him and he had just lost Sirius. Did you have fun with, what's his name? Ah, so he thought she had, well, she could use that to her advantage. Brian. And yes, he was an excellent specimen of a man. Well, he might have been, if she had hung around to find out. His name might even have been Brian. Harry turned around to continue with his cooking, and she wondered what expression was on his face that he felt the need to hide. Good for you. I'm glad you're getting out and enjoying yourself. You deserve to be happy. She wondered why he allowed her the happiness he repeatedly denied himself. She was quiet as they ate breakfast, watching him carefully, and planning. She helped him clean up before pulling him into the living room and pushing him down onto the couch. Okay, Harry, she said excitedly. I think I had an epiphany last night about your morphing. Busy night, he said, dryly. She just smiled. After several minutes of silence, he finally huffed impatiently. So, are you going to tell me what you figured out? Nope, she answered brightly. He looked shocked. Why not? Because I want to see if I'm right before I say anything. And adorably confused. Okay. What do you want me to do? Well, I've figured out a training regime for you, if you can just find what triggers your transformations. Tonks, he groaned in frustration. You know I don't know how to trigger it. She smiled. He might not, but she did, and it was time to test out her hypothesis. Oh, well then, I guess we have nothing to do today. She bounced out of her seat. Then I can go spend the day with Brian. She was looking for it, so she saw his eyes flash black. Sure, Tonks. Have fun. His voice was perfectly even. She was impressed with his control. She beamed at him and plopped back down into her seat. So, how'd you do it? She asked brightly. He stared at her in complete confusion. Do what? Your eyes flashed black. They did it last night, too. He jolted in shock. They did. Yep. Last night your hair flashed, too. She was bouncing in her seat. But, how? He looked completely incredulous. She had to bite her lip to keep from laughing at his expression. Her excited smile softened a bit. Well, what is the common thread between last night and this morning? He really needed to figure it out for himself. He would probably be embarrassed if she had to tell him. She saw the exact moment when he figured it out because his face hardened before falling into a blank mask. I was thinking about this, she said softly. I think you have such tight control on your magic, it only slips when you're extremely upset. Relief showed in his eyes, and she wondered if he thought she hadn't guessed why he had been upset. So you're going to purposely upset me now? He did not look thrilled with this prospect. No. I was merely making sure my hunch was right. His eyes were tight again. So you're really not going to meet the blonde wonder? She scooted closer towards him. No, Harry. And, last night, she wondered how much it cost him to ask that. I left right after you did. She could see the restraint evident in every line of his body. His eyes were determinedly refusing to look at hers. Then why? She moved closer. Harry, I want you to morph for me. I can't. He sounded remarkably like a petulant child, and she had to fight a smile. He always seemed so old, it was nice to see that hadn't left his youth completely behind. Yes, you can. He finally met her eyes, and her heart hurt to see the despair there. She raised her hands and carefully placed them on either side of his face. You can, Harry. She held his gaze, trying to convey as much encouragement as she could. She could see the strain in his eyes as he struggled to find the ability. Without breaking his gaze, she slowly climbed into his lap, folding a leg on either side of him and sinking down to rest on his legs. I know you can do this, Harry. I know you can. He didn't break her gaze, but she could feel the shiver that ran through his body as she sat down. They sat like that for long minutes, not looking away from each other. She could feel him shaking slightly beneath her. Slowly, ever so slowly, his beautiful emerald eyes turned darker. When they were fully brown, she smiled brilliantly at him. That's marvelous, Harry. Her hands slid from his face back to tangle in his hair. Now, match me. Her eyes went startling blue, and she slowly played with his hair as he matched her. It took nearly 15 minutes. Next was gray, then silver, then yellow, and red, and purple, each one taking slightly less time for him to achieve. By this point, Harry was practically wilting from the exertion, so she switched to green and felt him relax under her. Are you ready for your reward? He gave the barest hint of a nod. Slowly, she moved forward and brushed her lips across his, never breaking eye contact. Carefully, she pulled back. Why did you do that? He whispered. Because you wanted it. He jerked as if she had slapped him, and she hurried to explain further. And because I finally admitted to myself that I did, too. Explain, please, he asked carefully. She could feel that he was holding himself in tight control, and hurried to soothe him. When I first met you, the scared, skinny, and lost boy intrigued me. I could see that you had great power in you, but you didn't know how to reach it. I could see that, despite everything you had been through, you had one of the biggest hearts I had ever encountered. She blushed slightly. And you had the most expressive eyes I have ever seen. He smiled shyly at this. Even just now, when they were a different color, you never lost that quality. They were always your eyes, no matter what color they were. He smiled briefly, recognizing what she was trying to tell him with that. She had accepted that what appearance he wore didn't matter. She gave an impish grin. Though I am partial to your natural green, but that may change. I'll let you know. She paused, recalling her train of thought. I had to work hard to look at you a certain way. He looked confused. You have no idea how easy it would have been to fall into the trap of fancying the Harry Potter of legend. But I could see how little you resembled that legend, and so I forced you into a category in my mind of kids that I wasn't allowed to think of any other way. He gave a soft smile of understanding. I've kept you as that lost kid in my head for 2 years now, Harry. Even when I got here and could see for myself that you were now a man, I shied away from acknowledging it. Why? He asked quietly. Because, I figured you had enough hopelessly devoted fangirls after you. I've been convinced for years that I could never have a real, meaningful relationship, and you didn't deserve anything less. Then why did you keep pushing me towards other girls? Because I was trying to cement myself in the friend role. Isn't that what a best mate does? Be your wingman as you look for girls. Harry shrugged. Don't know. Never really had much luck with girls. There was something in his eyes that she didn't understand. She smiled. Tell me. I fancied this girl at school for a while, Cho Chong. She was the Ravenclaw Seeker, a year ahead of me. In my 5th year, she key-ed me once, and then we went to Hogsmeade. He rolled his eyes. It was a bloody disaster. The only thing we had in common was Quidditch, and she burst into tears every time we were alone. Then she stopped talking to me because of Hermione. Which I don't get. It's not like she didn't know I was friends with Hermione before she key-ed me. And I've never thought of Hermione like that. It should be obvious to everyone. He shook his head in confusion and she had to resist the urge to chuckle. She could understand how a teenage girl was intimidated by his relationship with the girl. And then I spent some time with Ginny, and the letters. I really thought we could make something work with her. But you know what happened with that. There was never anyone else. She asked softly. It was a shocking revelation, that Harry Potter, the boy who lived, had no experience with girls. No. He was unable to mask the dejection in his voice. Have you thought about what it would mean, if we were to do this? He pulled his eyes down from hers to stare at her stomach instead. No. I wouldn't let myself. She understood this, as she had done the same thing. Let's discuss this, then. Okay. He met her eyes again. There's the age difference. I am 6 years older than you. Of course, mentally they were pretty equal. Yes, but how long ago did I stop being a kid? I agree. But when this gets out, people will make a fuss. She wasn't looking forward to that possibility, as the press would probably get pretty bad. He scoffed. When have I ever cared what other people thought? Besides, I'm not entirely convinced that I'll let people know it's me when I go back. I might just be Harry Lewis for the rest of my life. That was a tempting idea. Then they could inflate his age to hopefully avoid some of the fallout. Of course, the fact that he wouldn't be Harry Potter meant that there probably wouldn't be much of a fuss anyways. And Voldemort. This was a big one. He hesitated before answering. I always told myself that I couldn't be serious with anyone until after I dealt with him. But it's different with you. Why? I don't have to worry so much. You can take care of yourself. And you aren't naive about the danger you could be in. You understand. Yes, I do. She took a big breath. And the morphing. He grinned slightly. Didn't I already explain this to you? Yes. I'm just making sure. You know I've not had good experiences before. He nodded, and pushed on her slightly until she got up. Change for me. Hesitantly, she took a voluptuous form. He stood and walked to her, his eyes sweeping over her body before meeting hers. His hands came up and cupped her face. You are beautiful. She smiled, and he stepped back. Change. She took a slim brunette form. Again, his eyes swept her body. Beautiful, he whispered. Change. An athletic redhead. A short Asian girl. A slightly plump girl with black hair. A Middle Eastern girl with curly hair. A willowy girl with silver hair. A black girl with tightly braided hair. A short girl with blue hair. And, finally, her normal form with customary pink hair. His reaction never changed. When she had cycled through, he asked quietly, Do you see? I will always like what I see, as long as you don't try to turn into a real person. I have a problem with you pretending to be someone else, outside of missions for the Aurors or such. She had to resist the urge to beam at him. You are always beautiful to me. She grinned and became a sickly old hag. Even now. Of course. I can feel that it is you, whatever your outward form. He could tell she didn't believe him, so he carefully stepped forward and pulled her tightly against him. With open eyes he lowered his head and keyed her. Tonks whimpered, her own hands snaking up into his hair. He pulled back just enough so that he could talk. When you love someone, it doesn't matter what they look like. She smiled and morphed in his arms. He grinned as soft brown hair grew down past her shoulders and fell over his hands. He twisted his fingers through it. Though we would look a little weird if you went out as an old lady and I still couldn't keep my hands off of you. Perhaps we should hold that morph until I can match. She giggled, and then gave him a stern look. Weren't you supposed to be the one that was morphing today? He smirked. Are you going to reward me? Oh, yes. She stepped back and pushed him down onto the couch again, then resumed her seat in his lap. We did eyes. Next is hair. Match me. Black to brown, to blonde, to red, to purple, to blue, to green, to silver, to gold, to white. After each morph, she would lean forward and key him, each one getting longer and deeper. When she finally went back to black, she gave up stopping and just continued to key him. They would pull away to pant only to crash back together seconds later. It was obvious to her that he wasn't a very experienced keyer, but his passion and enthusiasm more than made up for it. And he was a quick learner. She pulled back, forced in several panting breaths, and murmured, tongue. She showed her own tongue and demonstrated as it grew in length. He grinned and took a minute to figure out how, then matched her. With a grin she leaned back into him, and quickly showed him the benefits associated with a longer and more agile tongue. When Tonks eventually pulled away to allow him to make them some lunch, it was with a large smile on her face. She had figured out how to train Harry, and the side benefits were impressive. And he seemed to have completely worked through whatever block he had placed on his magic. His ability to hold the morphs needed to be trained, but she didn't think it would be a problem. She idly wondered if his regular spell work would be affected. She watched him as he cooked, outlining the order that they would try morphing in. When he placed their plates down and sat opposite her, she looked down nervously and picked at her food. Tonks. You don't have to call me that, Harry. She looked up to see his brow furrowed. But you hate your name. Well, I don't want you to call me Nymphadora. But Tonks, it just doesn't seem appropriate for a, boyfriend. He suggested, grinning. She smiled. Yeah, a boyfriend to use. So what do you want me to call you? Nymph. Dora. She considered this carefully. I don't know. Sometimes people call me Dora, and it's not too bad. But you want me to have my own name for you. She smiled shyly. He was extremely perceptive. Yeah, he smirked. Well, you are my very own nymph, so I could call you that. She made a face, and he took this to mean she didn't like it. I've been called that before. And she very much didn't want to be constantly reminded of those experiences. He nodded, and retreated into thought. Well, how about I name you after a famous nymph? So there will still be that connection, but it won't actually be a part of your original name. You are not calling me Calypso. She glared at him as her hair flashed green. He grinned. I like Thetis. She created a great warrior, and you're turning me into one. Though I would appreciate it if we could skip the ankle problem. She giggled. Let's try it out and see. She took several bites of her lunch. I wanted to talk to you about something. Okay. You told me about your experience with girls, or lack thereof. Yes, he acknowledged hesitantly. You've only ever keyed one other girl, and nothing else. He nodded. I've done a bit more than that. I know. Does that bother you? He shrugged. I'm sure it would if I thought about it too much, but that wouldn't be very fair of me. Of course you've done more, you've had 6 more years living life, and you're naturally more outgoing than me. Why? Were you worried? A bit. But I also want to know, well, I guess what I mean is I need you to let me know how comfortable you are with certain things, and how fast you want to move in this. Oh, he set his fork down. First of all, I will let you know if there is ever anything I'm not okay with. She smiled. Second, I'll admit that my knowledge of the more physical aspects of relationships is rather limited. But I am by no means wary of anything. So as long as you don't mind having to guide your naive boyfriend, I really don't think there is any reason to be worried. I can live with that. She grinned at his maturity. He really had grown up. Was there something in particular that concerned you? Well, I have been worried for weeks about certain aspects of your training, and with me more or less being your motivating factor, it will be even worse. I don't understand. When we get to body shape changes, the best way to do it is for you to see me change. He looked at her blankly. Meaning I probably wouldn't be wearing any clothes. And to monitor you, you would need to be naked as well. He gulped, and his eyes burned gold. Her breath caught at the sight. I think I can deal with that, he said quietly. You do realize that I will probably jump you if we're both naked. Yeah, he breathed. I'm okay with that, too. Is there anything you wouldn't be okay with? His breathing was labored by now, and his eyes had a far-off quality in their still golden depths. She was beginning to think she might like gold even more than green. Not that I can think of. He paused. Well, I don't want to share you. Ever. She grinned. So no threesomes. He growled. No. She fought to control her large smile, and lost. I think I like you being all possessive. Good. Because it's probably only going to get worse. He stared at her for several minutes, then shook himself. His eyes returned to normal. What's next on the morphing schedule, then? Hair, again. You did color but you also need texture and thickness. She answered promptly. And what do I get if I can do them properly? He asked with a smirk. She winked. I'll think of something. They cleaned up the kitchen quickly, and resumed their seats on the couch. By the end of the night, his hair was really displaying a life of its own. The next morning, Tonks had him start with small changes related to things he had already done: lips, mouth, and eyebrows. He was able to get the hang of them fairly quickly. But when she asked for facial structure changes, he hit a wall. He watched as she changed her cheekbones and nose over and over, and couldn't seem to make it work. It seemed like he had trouble figuring out how to change more than one feature at a time. Harry, relax. You're trying too hard. He huffed in irritation. I just don't get it. I could do the others just fine, why not this? You forget how long it took us to get you to change anything. Now, relax, Kimi. His frustration vanished and he grinned. Now that I can do. His hands tangled in her currently purple hair and pulled her towards him. He placed light kiss on her lips until she growled in frustration and attacked him with hot, open-mouthed kiss. Then he was lost in the pleasure of her mouth and tongue. He was so focused on her lips, he didn't notice at first when one of her hands started wandering down his chest. He jolted away from her when she caressed the zipper of his jeans. Tonks. He gasped in shock. She giggled. What did I say about that name, Harry? He gulped. Sorry. Thetis. She sighed. I think I quite like that coming from you. She looked at him sternly. But only you, understand. Yes, dear. Her fingers continued to dance along his zipper. Do you like this, Harry? Yes, he hissed. Do you want more? He nodded furiously. Then match me. She started with a small change. Her nose grew thinner and longer. Harry screwed up his face in concentration while she continued to tease him with her hand. Finally, he changed. She smiled brilliantly, and her fingers went up to pop open the button on his jeans. He gasped. She scrunched up her eyes until her cheekbones became more pronounced, and then looked back at him. He struggled with this until her fingertips snuck into the top of his jeans. Then his face matched hers. She slowly pulled down the zipper on his pants. This time, her entire face shape changed drastically. Harry shot her an incredulous look, as if saying it was too much to ask, but she merely pushed her fingers through the gap in his pants and trailed them along him. She asked for several different faces before she declared him done, all the while she continued to toy with him and his breathing grew increasingly rapid. When she was satisfied he got the hang of it, she grinned and pushed her entire hand through to wrap around him. She keyed along his jaw as he panted and beeped at her ministrations, and smiled impishly when he came, calling her name. Harry looked up at the grinning creature who was still sitting in his lap. "You are evil," she laughed. "But you enjoy it." "Oh, yeah." Rather reluctantly, she pulled her hand out and helped him do up his pants, and then hopped off his lap. "Now, let's eat something. You've had enough of a strain today, and tomorrow we want to try some of those body changes." Harry grinned and pulled her form towards him until he was able to lean over and nuzzle her stomach. He nipped playfully, causing her to gasp. "I think I might like that." Her hands came up and tangled in his hair, holding him to her. "Me, too," she whispered. He continued to press keys into her stomach, and slowly brought his hands down until they were groping at her ass. He groaned as he held her. "I've wanted to touch your ass for years, you know." "Touch it all you want," she beeped. "I don't mind." He proceeded to do just that for the rest of the day. Tonks and Harry both stood in the living room, looking at each other with anticipation. So what's next?" he asked nervously. "Body changes," she reminded him. "Okay. As we progress, we'll each remove an article of clothing that will allow you to see me do the various changes, and vice versa." He gulped. "Okay. First, skin tone. Match me." Her skin turned a lovely golden color. Harry examined it carefully, and then focused on that well of power that allowed him to morph. The magic seemed to be fighting back against him, but he was determined. He very much wanted to earn his reward. The first time he managed it, you could barely tell the difference, so he tried again. Tonks licked her lips at his nicely tanned look, before changing her own skin again, this time to chocolate brown. He matched her after a few moments. They both relaxed back. Good. Her hands came up and slowly undid the fastenings on her pants. With her eyes on his the entire time, she lowered them to the ground and stepped out of them. She smiled in satisfaction when Harry's eyes fixated on her long legs. "Now, you can generally change 3 things about individual body parts: muscle mass, fat ratio, and bone size. Most changes will affect all 3, as you want to maintain a relatively balanced look." He nodded, not pulling his eyes from her legs. "Harry, you need to take your pants off." His eyes shot up to meet her laughing ones. With a grin, he hastily pulled his own pants off and threw them onto the couch. He was staring so intently at her legs, his own changed almost at the same time. She grinned at the sight. "Very good, Harry." Her hands came up and slowly opened each button on her shirt. In the blink of an eye, she was standing there in only herb and knickers, and Harry was having trouble breathing. "Now, I doubt you want to give yourself beeps, and that is a major area of change for me, but you can do similar body changes on your torso and arms." He didn't even move, his gaze steady on her chest. Smiling, she walked over and took his shirt off herself. Then she stepped back. For nearly an hour, Tonks walked him through a plethora of body changes. She showed him which ones would help him hide in a crowd, and which ones would draw more attention. She showed him which ones would help in a fight, and which ones would help him escape. Harry's eyes never left her body during the entire time. Smiling, Tonks brought her hands to her back. "You did very well, Harry," she murmured as she unsnapped her bra. With a flick of her wrist, it was sent flying away from her, and Harry whimpered as her beeps were displayed to his hungry eyes. "Do you like your reward, Harry?" "Your prefect," he mumbled. Grinning, she showed him the various changes she could do to her own chest. Her spirits flew when he seemed to like them all. "If I take the rest off, will you do complete changes for me?" He nodded dumbly. She smiled and slowly drew her knickers down. When they were off, she turned slowly on the spot, allowing him to see all of her. "Do you like what you see?" "Always. Are you going to reciprocate?" With slightly shaky hands he pulled his boxers down and stepped out of them. Tonks stared at him hungrily. With slight words of encouragement, Harry proceeded to display various different full changes, and she critiqued him on each one. As of yet, he couldn't hold them for long, but she was impressed at his ability to manage them at all so quickly. When he was panting with exertion, she quietly told him to stop. She shifted her own form to black flowing hair and full beeps, and sauntered towards him. I think you deserve something extra special for that. I'll take you. She smiled and caressed his cheek. You have me. But I'm going to show you some of the things I can do for you. Her hands traced down his body as she sunk to her knees before him. With an impish grin up at his expression of incredulity, she took him into her mouth. He watched in awe, his hands tangled in her hair, as she moved on him. Her own hands had come up and were caressing his ass and pulling him further into her. He could feel as she morphed to allow her to take more of him, and groaned at the sight. When he finished, she pulled back, smiling up at him. He had a look of awe in his once more golden eyes. You are amazing. She grinned and slowly stood up. Why thank you. He stared at her. Can I touch you? She giggled. Oh, yes, please. He blushed slightly. Will you show me how? She took his hand and led him into his large bedroom, and pushed him into a seated position on his bed. She shut his door so that he could see himself in the large mirror that hung behind it, and then came and sat in his lap, her back pressed tightly to his chest. She picked his hands up and brought them up to her body. Harry shuddered under her. Explore me, Harry. Harry diligently did just that. His hands covered every inch of her body, and experimented with different pressures in various places. He carefully catalogued each reaction she had as he played with her. He watched carefully in the mirror as he explored her, enthralled by the strong reactions she had when he touched in particular areas. With careful directions, she taught him how to bring her to pleasure using only his hands, and he took her over the edge again and again until she was pleading for a reprieve. Her entire body overly sensitive at the moment, Tonks convinced him that they could stop for lunch. He agreed, if they kept the clothes off. This, of course, meant that he regularly stopped to grope at her, and never stopped staring. After lunch, she walked him through various defense-associated morphs. She showed him things that would allow him more agility, or flexibility, or strength. Most of the changes were subtle, and wouldn't be visible, at least when they were wearing clothes, but they still would provide quite a bit of an edge during a fight. Harry, of course, was enthralled by the fact that the entire lesson was given in the nude. He was also amazed that she was confident enough in herself to do so without the slightest sign of discomfort. After a quick dinner, Tonks grinned at him. I want to be selfish for the rest of the night. Okay, he agreed instantly. I want to teach you to dance with me, as it is something I greatly enjoy. She pulled him to the center of the room, and placed his hands on her hips. After a minute of maneuvering she huffed. Harry, can you get taller? It makes this easier. He grinned, and instantly grew a good 4 inches. Her head tucked comfortably under his chin and she giggled. I like this attitude of yours. I used to want to castrate any guy that asked me to morph for him for his own comfort or desires. Harry dipped his head and placed a key on top of her currently brown hair. I don't mind. My morphing is a part of me, so whatever form I take is still me. For over an hour she guided him through various dance positions. Everything from the formal waltz to club grinding. When his obvious reaction to having her so close began to be distracting, she pulled away and took his hand, leading him back to his bed. With a smile, she lay back, her body spread and open for him. I'm going to teach you to pleasure me, Harry. Yes, my Thetis. I showed you what you could do with your hands this morning. Now I want to show you what you can do with your mouth. She beckoned him forward until he was hovering above her. With confident movements she led his head down to her chest. Most stimulation here will be enjoyable, but anything with the mouth is best. He nodded and leaned down to place a hesitant key. She shuddered beneath him. You can even use your teeth, as long as you're careful not to hurt me. Harry sunk down, leaning on his forearms that were resting on either side of her. Carefully, he explored her with his tongue, placing keys as he went. He grinned as she beeped loudly. It was heavenly, and he sunk further down towards her. Eventually, he became aware that she was trying to get his attention and he pulled back, a goofy grin on his face. She was panting. That was wonderful, Harry. Yes, it was. She giggled. Generally, any place on my body will enjoy being explored by your mouth, but we'll save that. Right now, I need release. Okay. She placed her hands on his head and pushed gently until he was further down her body, his head directly above her groin. "You're going to use your mouth to bring me to pleasure." His eyes widened in shock. "You want me to put my mouth here?" "Oh, yes. Explore to your heart's content." She nearly laughed at his odd expression. "And, Harry, that little tongue trick will really help." With shining golden eyes, Harry brought his face down and eagerly extended his tongue to explore her. He had never even considered this possibility, but he was eager to explore it. Tonks woke up slowly. She blinked her eyes until the room came into focus, and then tried to take stock of the situation. She could feel Harry curled tightly against her back. His erection was pushing insistently against her back, and both of his hands were wrapped around her, cupping her beeps. She shivered with the sensation. For a novice, he certainly hadn't been shy. While she had to guide him in most things, Harry had eagerly jumped in to try anything she asked. And his having been naked for much of the previous day, she had been able to confirm his words. He truly did like her in any form. There were certain forms that drew his eye to different parts of her body, but he always found something to look at that he seemed to enjoy. And she hadn't minded enhancing that for his pleasure. If he would change for her pleasure, she didn't mind changing for his. She was beginning to think that metamorphs were designed to mate with each other, as that was the only way the relationship could truly be equal. In his sleep, he pulled her tightly back against him, and his erection slipped down to nestle securely against her ass. She drew in a shuddering breath and was instantly reaching for her wand. With several spells cast, she pulled away from his groping arms and turned to look at him. She pushed him gently on his back, and climbed over him to sit on his thighs. She leaned forward and started keying along his jaw. "Harry," she called quietly. "Wake up." He groaned, and his head turned so that his mouth could meet hers. She keyed him deeply, smiling softly when his arms came up around her, indicating that he was awake. She pulled away to see his eyes sparkling at her. "Good morning, Thetis." She sighed happily. "Did you sleep well?" He grinned. "I woke up to a goddess, of course I did." She grinned. Her hands came up and lazily began exploring his chest. "You were such a good boy yesterday, Harry. You did everything I asked." He smirked. "Such a good boy deserves the best kind of reward, don't you think?" His hands came up to plump her beeps. With a smile, she enlarged them until they completely filled his large hands. He smiled. "I thought I already had my reward." She threw her head back and beeped slightly. "I was thinking that you deserved something else. You spent all day learning, you should get an entire day to play." He shuddered. "What did you have in mind?" With a grin, she pulled away from his hands. Ignoring his frown, she rose up on her knees and scooted back, until she was hovering over him. His frown dropped instantly. Without a word, she sunk down onto him, her body shivering with need at the feel of him. Harry gasped in shock. His hands clenched around her waist as he panted beneath her. Tonks winked down at him as she began moving above him. They summoned their food to them and didn't leave the bed for the rest of the day. It took nearly 4 weeks for Harry to develop the control to hold a morph indefinitely. Once he managed to last a few hours, they took to once more exploring the city, a different, yet perfectly matched, couple each day. Harry's rewards were both highly educational and extremely pleasurable for both. But the idyll could not last. There was still a war to be fought, and both knew this. When Tonks deemed Harry capable of holding a morph through a firefight and he demonstrated that he could even hold it in his sleep, they began to make their plans to return. It took several days of discussion for them to agree on a plan. Harry refused to release the truth about his identity, and was hesitant to even speak with Dumbledore. Tonks spent an entire day convincing him that they really did need the old man's help. Hopefully, the disguise would be enough to get him to leave Harry relatively alone. On Saturday, October 11th, a young couple appeared in the Washington, D.C. branch of the Department of Magical Affairs. The young woman drew almost every male eye in the atrium with her short, curvy figure, straight dark brown hair that was streaked with pink and purple, and green eyes. The man holding her hand was quite a bit taller and walked with the grace of a professional fighter. He had short, dirty blonde hair and light blue eyes. The couple made their way confidently through the building and disappeared behind a door that few ever entered. A statue of a soldier guarded the many hallways behind the door. It spoke as they approached. Name: Nymphadora Tonks, here to register the completion of training of a new metamorph. Proceed to room 53. They walked down the indicated hallway and found the appropriate door. Sitting around a large table were 3 people. One was the same official who had been present when Tonks first arrived, another was a wizened old man with deep sunken eyes, and the last was a thin woman who steadfastly refused to meet their eyes. Tonks and Harry entered and sat down across from the others. The first man spoke. "You have completed the training of Harry James Potter." "Yes." He nodded and turned to look at Harry. "If you would care to demonstrate, please." Harry nodded and stood. He cycled through a wide range of transformations before returning to his earlier form and resuming his seat. The woman looked impressed. "How long can you hold a form?" she asked. "Days, at least. I can sleep with it, and fight with it. Even injuries do not seem to interfere, though I have yet to be seriously injured. It is possible that I would be unable to hold a morph if that happens. Is there a reason you have chosen to register with us instead of your own ministry?" "We understand you are planning to return to England soon," she asked. "I have to return, as there is a war to win. But I do not plan to return as Harry Potter. With your permission, I will arrive as Harry Lewis. I have to register my skills however, or risk being arrested. I would prefer that you know the truth than them." The first man smiled. "This will, of course, mean that we can call on you if it is needed." "Yes, sir." He exchanged a glance with the woman. "Very well. We will draw up the appropriate papers immediately. Thank you." Harry and Tonks stood and turned to leave when the old man spoke for the first time. "Halt." They turned around, curious. "Sir, do you know what it is you carry with you, boy?" Harry looked confused. "I don't understand. You have more than your own soul in your body. The other is malevolent." Harry froze. It did not take him long to come to the conclusion of who, exactly, that piece of soul belonged to. He collapsed back against the wall, furiously shaking his head. "Harry?" Tonks asked in concern. Harry didn't answer her. He met the old man's gaze. "Voldemort, I would assume. How do I get rid of it?" The old man gave a smirk. "Perhaps we should talk before you do that. I would venture to guess that you are not the only place he has deposited a portion of his soul." "Why? Why would he do that?" "I would assume it was unintentional with you. But it has been known for the very dark to tear their soul willingly and secret a portion away, thereby preventing their own death. Since he was able to come back after your encounter with him as a child, it would only make sense that he had more than one such object. You will need to destroy them all if you hope to defeat him." "And why can't we get this out of me now?" "Because like seeks like, Mr. Potter. I can show you how to seek out the others." "Oh." Harry looked deep in thought for several minutes before giving a firm nod. "Would this be why I get visions from him? And why I feel intense pain in his presence?" "Most probably. Particularly given how well you have occluded your mind." The man gave him a speculative look. "Have you ever reversed the connection?" "You mean invaded his mind?" "Yes. No, not really. At least not intentionally. Sometimes I dream about what he sees, but I have never had any control over it." "Perhaps you should try. If you could push him to think of his soul pieces, it would be most beneficial to discover their locations." "Can you teach me how?" The old man gave a feral grin. "To defeat Voldemort? Gladly. Why don't you come back and so we can talk? I am David Webb, welcome to the Magical Intelligence Agency branch of the CIA." October 24, 1997. Tonks sat beside Harry, her left hand holding tightly to his while her right was clutching a quill. She really didn't like what Harry was about to try, but had been unable to talk him out of it. And she did understand how useful it could be. "Are you sure?" she asked one final time. She would find another way if it would spare him. "There isn't any other way, you know that Thetis. I don't want to be blindly hunting for these things for who knows how long just so I can avoid an evening of pain." She huffed. "Fine, I'm ready." Harry nodded and shut his eyes. It had taken nearly a week to discover what would reverse the connection he had with Voldemort. They knew that Harry felt or saw things when Voldemort felt a particularly strong emotion, and had originally thought the reverse would be true as well. However, Harry had felt several strong emotions and never seen any backlash through the scar. It was David who finally found the answer. Dumbledore had been right, partially, when he said that love was Harry's power and that it was emotion that drove his magic. Thus, whenever Voldemort felt particularly strong emotions, Harry picked up on it. It would be different going the other direction. This much was easy to understand. Of course, it had taken nearly another week to discover what it was that drove Voldemort's magic. So now Harry sat, pulling up every fear he could, reminding himself of all of the terrifying possibilities that awaited him and those he cared about if he were to fail. For fear of death and what came after it, was what drove Tom Riddle in his quest to conquer the world and achieve immortality. Harry was shuddering and shaking as Tonks watched on, unable to comfort him. He allowed only a small portion of his mind to seek the connection to Voldemort, a place he had always shied away from approaching. And even when he did, it was barricaded and completely unapproachable. Now, his mind filled with the image of Tonks, naked and abused body being torn into by jeering Death Eaters, Harry was aware as the protections vanished. He moved carefully forward, until he could make out thoughts that were not his own, and then stopped. He wanted to be able to retreat as quickly as possible. Then he allowed fear of his own death to flow out in his near panic. Lord Voldemort considered the most recent reports. He was certain that Potter would return now that he was of age, but the new school year at Hogwarts had started, and there had been no sign of the boy. Voldemort did not know whether this meant Potter was a coward, or smart enough to hide. Either way, it was time that he stopped wasting all his efforts to find the boy. Potter may be the only one capable of defeating him, but he would have to come back to do so, and he would have plenty of warning. Yes, it was time to push for young Draco to carry out his task. Actually, it was probably better that Draco attempted it without Potter there to distract him. The young Malfoy was too easily distracted and too hot-headed to realize what was truly important. He called in a servant to get the message to the boy, and sent another to Bella. He was still not sure of Severus' loyalty, and he knew she could maneuver him most skillfully. Yes, soon Dumbledore would be dead, and he would know for sure whose side Severus was really on. He sat back, pleased. Everything was going well, except for the small disappearance of the boy. It was really odd that he had run. It did not seem to fit with what he knew of the reckless Gryffindor. Not that it really mattered. He shouldn't worry so much about the boy, as there was no way anyone could defeat him. After all, he had already proven that he could not be killed, even by the boy. Yes, his beloved Horcruxes would ensure his survival. It was really a stroke of brilliance that he had thought to make so many. Lucius still had not recovered from his displeasure on learning that the diary had been destroyed. At least the rest were safe. He had even added extra protections to several of them after his rebirth. He was particularly fond of the curse he had added to the Gaunt Ring. Of course, that was the most vulnerable. It was entirely possible that Dumbledore would return to his mother's ancestral home. That was why he had added the curse, specifically keyed to the old man. He chuckled in amusement with the thought of Dumbledore dying a piece at a time. Delicious. The cup, he knew, was completely unreachable. The goblins' security was legendary, and it was protected nicely in Bella's vault. He knew, better than anyone, what it took to break into Gringotts. The goblins may have downplayed his break-in years ago with that idiot Quirrell, but while it was true he had taken nothing, it had required the sacrifice of 7 muggles to get beyond the wards. He figured they wouldn't want anyone to know what it would take to break in. Regardless, none of the so-called light would be willing to make such a sacrifice. The cup was safe. Not that he could do anything if it wasn't damned goblins wouldn't let the convict Lestranges in without alerting the ministry. Nagini, of course, was nearly always with him so he could keep an eye on her. The only time that she was on her own, he was actively watching over her. And it was rare he used her. She had almost been caught when she attacked that fool Weasley, and he was still not sure how they had gotten there so quickly. He could not risk losing her. And she was the only pleasant company he had these days. The locket would be fine. No one knew about the cave, as he had taken the time to kill the women who used to watch him at the orphanage, and he knew very well there was no way around that potion. Nasty business, it was. It was Severus' finest work. And, of course, the diadem. He still laughed at having placed it right under Dumbledore's nose. But no one would be able to find it. He was the only one who had found that special room, and if it had survived this long without Dumbledore noticing, there was no way he would find it now. Yes, they were safe. He could concentrate on his other plans. Albus Dumbledore was about to die. October 28, 1997. It was a cold and dreary Tuesday. The two figures arrived via secure portkey in the Ministry welcoming bay. One was a registered Auror, Nymphadora Tonks, who had been on loan to the Americans for the last few months. The other was a young man that the Ministry of Magic held no record of. He gave his name as Harry Lewis, age 20. He said that he had been born in England but taken to America by his parents fairly early. He was registered as a fully trained metamorph as per ministry regulations, via the American consulate. After exiting the ministry, Harry and Tonks apparated straight to her small flat in London. Once there, she sent an owl to Dumbledore explaining that she was back, and had brought a new friend with her who might be willing to fight for the cause. The response was nearly immediate, as Fawkes flamed into her small apartment with a scroll asking for her to bring her friend for a meeting. Right away. It was fortunate that Harry's first meeting with the Phoenix was unobserved by others, as there would have been no disguising Fawkes' song of joy. However, Harry seemed to convince the bird that he should keep his knowledge to himself, as when Harry and Tonks stepped out of the fire and into Dumbledore's office, Fawkes didn't pay him a bit of attention. Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk, eyes twinkling as he observed the young man that stepped out of the fire. He was clearly a fighter, simply by the way he walked. Dumbledore could also sense the power that the boy had access to. It was almost oppressive to someone with the ability to sense magic. But the best part was that he was holding young Nymphadora's hand. As he was romantically involved with her, he would most likely be more amenable to helping with the war. Dumbledore stood as the couple finished dusting themselves off, and strode forward. "Hello. Welcome to Hogwarts. I am Albus Dumbledore." The young man looked up at him and eyed him carefully before taking his hand and firmly shaking it. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Albus noticed that the boy seemed to have a strange accent. It was clearly English, but there was enough American to suggest he had lived there for some time. "I am Harry Lewis." Dumbledore started at the name, and shot a glance at Tonks. She gave a firm shake of her head, and he shook his head in despair. He looked back at the young man. "You are a metamorph." "Yes, sir. And you only recently discovered this." "Yes. My magic had been unconsciously blocking my transformation for most of my life. It took Tonks and me over a month to figure out how to work around that." "And have you mastered your transformations now?" "Yes, sir." "Excellent." Dumbledore gestured towards a pair of seats and resumed his own seat. "Your accent is rather unusual. Where are you from?" "My parents were English, but we moved to America to get away from the First War, to Pennsylvania, to be precise. I have spent the last several years in New York City." "Did you work there?" "No, sir. My parents were able to provide for me so that I could continue some of my studies." "Oh, I am Yoden, a 4th-degree black belt in judo." Dumbledore's eyes widened. That was impressive for one so young. The boy must have been studying for many years. "Forgive me, but you seem so young. I am only 20. But my dedication to the art allowed me to advance quickly." "And what do you intend to do now?" Harry shot a look at Tonks before answering. "I have learned much about the war here from Tonks. She was adamant about coming back, and I refused to let her come alone. I will fight for her." Dumbledore's twinkle increased. "Has she informed you about the organization I lead?" "Vaguely. Do you wish to join?" "No," he answered calmly. Dumbledore stared at him in shock. "But you just said." Harry met his startled gaze. "I said I will fight, and I will, but I do not fight under anyone but myself. You require either a loyalty oath or, if this goes against previous oaths such as those Tonks is under, you require that new members submit to a legitimacy probe. I will give my oath to no man, and there isn't a being alive that I will allow free rein to access my mind. I will fight, but I will do so my way." Dumbledore frowned. "I'm sure you can understand why this concerns me, Mr. Lewis." Harry shrugged. "Only once in my life have I willingly sworn a vow. Tonks and I share an unbreakable trust." He saw Dumbledore's eyes light up with awareness at the word. "I will come to fight any time you call her, and I will continue to fight until the leech on this country has been put down." Tonks, standing quietly at his side, had to resist the urge to flinch when he said that. He should not have used that word. But it seemed that Dumbledore missed the insinuation. Dumbledore sighed. "Very well. May I at least have your word not to share any intelligence Tonks may share with you with anyone else?" "Very well." Dumbledore turned to Tonks. "Now that you have returned, will you resume your typical missions?" "No, sir." He was once more shocked. "No. Harry and I will fight our own way. You may send word to me whenever you know of an attack, and we will help, but I will not have time for any extra. Very well. Mr. Lewis, it was a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. Nymphadora, he ignored her glare. It is always a pleasure. I will be in touch. The couple gave nods of acknowledgement before departing, leaving in their wake a rather confused headmaster. Nymphadora must truly love the boy, he thought, if she is taking such a stance. And the boy himself was interesting. A tiny flicker of hope had entered his mind when the lad gave his name, but it was quickly squashed. He was too old, and there was no way he could have accomplished so much in a little over a year. No, Harry Potter was still lost. It was such a shame that Harry Lewis refused to join the order. But Dumbledore knew that he would still be useful to the cause. It was obvious how he felt about Nymphadora, and he would come whenever she was called. A pair of highly skilled fighters who were metamorphs to boot would be a huge boon to the order. A light knock came at the door and Dumbledore looked up. Come in, Severus. The potions master looked horrible, and Dumbledore was instantly concerned. Are you okay, my boy? The troubled man met his gaze. Bellatrix forced me into an unbreakable vow tonight. To what end? Yours. Harry and Tonks left the headmaster's office and exchanged a small smile. That had gone well. She winked at him. Would you like a tour of my school, love, since we are here? Harry smirked. That would be wonderful. It is quite an impressive place. How old did you say it was? Around 1,000 years, though no one is sure of the exact dates, as there is precious little data available about the founders. But it is thought that it came about roughly the same time as the Statute of Secrecy. I like to think that is why there are so many secrets here. It was built by people who were used to hiding everything about themselves, and so they would do so even among their peers. Secrets. Oh, yes. There are trick steps and hidden passageways and secret rooms. There was even a rumor that several years ago a student found a secret chamber containing a 1,000-year-old basilisk. But I think that one was probably not true. Who would believe that? Harry laughed. Quite. He looked around curiously. What was your favorite place? She giggled. There is a very special room up in the 7th floor. Why don't I show you? He smirked. Lead the way, Thetis. She leaned into his side as he wrapped an arm around her waist while they walked, the eyes of the portraits following their every move. They didn't leave for another 2 hours, though it had only taken 10 minutes to find and destroy the item they had come for. But that might have been the fault of the room. Neither of them would admit which one had asked for the large bed and roaring fire, but they had taken advantage of it. Repeatedly. None of the watching portraits were able to see through the tightly wrapped invisibility cloak that covered the sword lashed onto Harry's back. It had shown up in the room as they were getting ready to leave. October 29, 1997. Harry sighed in exasperation. Hedwig, you can't just fly where anyone can see you looking like this. You know you stand out a bit. She hooted angrily and turned her head away from him imperiously. If you just let me change the color of your feathers, you would be free to go anywhere. Surely it is worth it. She screeched and launched herself at him, picking furiously at his head. Okay, I get it. I won't dye your feathers. October 31, 1997. Tonks stared down at the small device in her hand. Are you sure this will work? It seems awful small. Harry nodded. I just had to place a small containment field around the energy source, so magic wouldn't interfere. It will then transmit through an unused frequency on the radio. Turns out muggles and wizards use the same type of radio waves, so it should work just fine. She looked at him shrewdly for a minute before nodding in agreement. With a key for luck, Harry and Tonks disappeared to the atrium. They chatted happily, walking down to the Auror department. Occasionally, Tonks would wave at someone she knew, but they never stopped to chat. Both wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible. Harry received several strange looks in the large room full of messy cubicles and various witches and wizards with haggard expressions on their faces. Tonks led Harry over to a relatively clean area. This is mine. You can wait here while I chat with Amelia. He grinned and nodded, watching as she disappeared into a back room. They were taking advantage of her need to report and to plant the small muggle bug here, hoping that it would enable them to discover some of the fights while it was early enough to do some good. In addition, Tonks had to convince her boss that she was still unable to return to work. They had agreed that Tonks would reveal some of what they were up to if needed. Harry glanced around curiously. He had been here once before, the day of his trial when Mr. Weasley was speaking to Kingsley. But it was much more hectic now. It took him several minutes of quiet watching to figure out their response system, and then his eyes narrowed as he tried to decide the best place to leave the bug. It took half an hour for Tonks to come back, but she had a smile on her face and nodded at Harry. Then she took his hand and took him around to introduce him to some of her coworkers. She even stopped and invited the current dispatch witch, a young woman named Cynthia, out for drinks tomorrow night so they could catch up. Harry leaned up against the large fireplace as they chatted. No one noticed his hand slip behind him for a moment to leave the small device in a small hole in one of the bricks. November 2, 1997. Daniel Hill was beginning to wonder what had possessed him to enter this line of work. 15 years ago, when he began training, it had seemed such a glamorous choice of profession. You know who was gone and the most an Auror was expected to deal with were thieves and the isolated incidents of dark magic. He had failed to recognize what would happen if another Dark Lord arose, or came back, as the case may be. The last 2 years had gotten progressively worse until he now dreaded going to work, and each shift began with the prayer that he would still be alive at the end of it. As he listened to the dispatch office tell him that he and his young partner would have to go out alone on this call, he thought his time was finally up. Auror teams rarely came back when they were sent out alone against Death Eaters. It took a precious 2 minutes to get all his gear together. He followed young Boot into the flow, dread pooling in his stomach, and stepped out only to have a hysterical woman collapse in his arms. "Ma'am?" he asked, his eyes bouncing around to try and understand the situation. "Are you hurt?" "No," she wailed. "The children." His shoulders straightened and his focus sharpened. "Where are they, ma'am? We'll take care of them." "No. They saved me and now they're gone." "But they were only children." It took a good 20 minutes for him to get the full story out of her, while Boot secured the premises and collected the bodies, for that's all there was left of the attackers. There were 7 of them. The women, Helen Geller, was a member of the Wizengamot who routinely voted against pureblood politics. Her home was attacked, but barely 10 seconds after she flowed Auror headquarters, 2 small children, a boy and a girl about 10 years old, arrived and quickly dispatched all the Death Eaters. Madame Geller explained that the children's surprise appearance and age allowed them to take out the attackers before any of them began to return fire. Auror Hill finally stepped back into the fire an hour later, with 7 bodies following him through, wondering how he was going to explain the fact that 2 10-year-olds were the perpetrators. He was going to be the laughingstock of the entire unit. But at least he was coming back alive. November 8, 1997. Albus Dumbledore walked slowly down the overgrown path. He didn't think he ever would have found the place if it weren't for Bob Ogden's excellent memories. It took him nearly an hour to break through the various enchantments on the door, which seemed to verify his belief about what was hidden here. He fleetingly wished Harry was here, as he was sure many of them could be broken by use of Parseltongue. But that was a foolish hope. Harry Potter was gone and probably not coming back. As Albus carefully searched the small shack, his mind continued thinking about the lost child of prophecy. It had taken time, but he was now able to admit that it was mostly his fault that Harry had left. The lad had lived an unusually unpleasant life, and most of that was due to Albus' actions or negligence. It is hard for youth to accept the sacrifices that age finds necessary. Albus only wished there was a way to make it up to the boy, but he doubted he would ever see him again. He would just have to make the best of things as they were. He only wished he knew what to do about the Horcrux he was sure was in Harry's scar. His wand heated in his hand, and he began dismantling the protections over one particular floorboard. Finally, he lifted it away and carefully peered in. His breath caught. He recognized it instantly, and couldn't believe he had finally found it after searching for so long. He fervently regretted returning to Harry his father's cloak now. He could have possessed all 3. But at least he would have this, the most important one. He could see Ariana again. He reached in eagerly for it. And froze. A hand shot in front of him, clad in dragonhide, and carefully picked up the ring while Albus seethed that someone would have the gall to petrify him. He could hear movement and spell fire, and a blinding flash filled the room, and then he was released, but not before his wand was taken out of his hand. He whipped around. "Give it to me," he snarled. "Professor." He blinked. Nymphadora was looking at him with great concern. Standing beside her was Harry Lewis, holding both the stone and the wand. Are you all right, sir? He shook his head trying to clear it. Yes, thank you my dear. Please forgive me. May I ask what you are doing here? I imagine the same thing you are, young Lewis spoke quietly. He offered both objects back to an eager Albus. We've taken care of it, sir. Albus' eyes went wide. You destroyed it? Yes, sir. And how did you know about it? That information is protected under the oath we have both sworn, but I can assure you it will never get back to Voldemort from us. Albus sighed in relief, though he was still wary of the couple. Is this the first such object you have come across? No, sir. Lewis answered, and Albus nearly gasped in shock. I destroyed one several years ago, and Tonks and I found another last week, a rather remarkable diadem belonging to Rowena Ravenclaw. Albus staggered backwards. They had found the unknown last Horcrux. Thank you. You have done us a great service. Professor, Nymphadora drew his attention. We know where the others belonging to Voldemort are. Let us take care of them for you. You know where they all are. Yes, sir. It is possible to use one to find the others. We have all of their general locations. Albus didn't know what to think, but his attention kept on returning to the stone in his hand. Finally, he sighed and nodded. Very well. Please keep me informed. November 9, 1997. Hedwig, he began in his most convincing tone. You know I am just trying to protect you. If you could just be careful. I found that lovely wood for you to fly in and I'll take you every night. Just please stay out of sight. She glared at him. I know you are beautiful and like to be looked at, but I really just want you to be safe. Do you just think that you could stay out of sight? She flew immediately at him and dug her talons deeply into his hand. He took that for a no. November 10, 1997. Nathaniel Yaxley rolled his shoulders and tried to calm his breathing. It was always beneficial to go into a fight relaxed and loose. He was looking forward to tonight's raid. Just last week he had succeeded in casting the Imperious Curse on the senior undersecretary to the minister, Pius Thickness, and tonight they were acting on the information Thickness had passed along, the location and password to Scrimgeour's apparition wards. Yaxley's reward was to lead the raid that would take down the Minister of Magic, thus installing Thickness in his place. With a final glance at his men, he twisted on the spot and disappeared. He rolled immediately upon arrival, and cursed as he came back up to see the young Auror standing guard successfully shoot off a message moments before being cut down by a spell from young Montague. He made a mental note to work with the kid on his speed before the next raid. Yaxley took his anger out on the prone form of the Auror. He always did have a penchant for cutting up his victims. It amused him to force their families to have closed casket funerals. He was just finishing up with the Auror when two small forms darted into view, running in from the edge of the apparition wards. His brow furrowed in confusion as they started shooting spells at his men. They didn't even look old enough to attend Hogwarts, and yet they moved like experienced fighters. He blinked as another one of his men went down and finally brought his wand up. His last thought as the spell arched towards him was, who in the bloody hell are these kids? November 18, 1997. Bogrod was a busy goblin, and hated it when the humans wasted his time. As this generally happened every time they spoke with him, he was almost perpetually in a bad mood. He eyed the couple in front of him as they sat down. He didn't recognize either of them, but they seemed marginally more intelligent than the general human, as they had been polite in their greeting and request for a meeting. He grunted. What do you want? There was no reason to be nice to them. It was the male who spoke. I wish to claim my vault under a legal alias, secure the knowledge of that alias, and discuss another matter with you. Bogrod eyed him curiously. This was an unusual request. Do you have the appropriate paperwork? The male nodded and passed several documents over. Bogrod read through them carefully, without outward reaction. So, Harry Potter had returned to England. This was most interesting. Very. Well, Mr. Lewis. As it would cause suspicion to suddenly empty or transfer the ownership of the Potter Vault, he left unsaid the obvious fact that someone would be looking for such an action. I will set up a new vault for you and transfer a base amount, to be refilled periodically. Does this meet with your approval? Perfectly. Very well. The knowledge of your true identity will be limited to myself and the head goblin. Thank you. Now, what other issue did you have? Bogrod watched as the young man shifted nervously before speaking, and his eyes narrowed. We wish to enter, with your supervision, another's vault. Impossible, he answered flatly. The vault in question contains an item that was stolen from the last living descendant of Helga Hufflepuff and then was ed by Voldemort in a bid to achieve immortality. We do not wish to take this object from the vault, or damage its true nature, simply remove the enchantments Voldemort placed on it. In addition, I am her head of house. I could claim the entirety of her vaults, if you would prefer, though that might alert them to what I am doing, which would be unwise. Bogrod sat back in shock. The request was unprecedented. Normally, he would deny it outright, but if what they were claiming was true, he, as well as the Goblin Nation, did not want Voldemort to win this war. And, technically, they were not asking to break any of the Gringotts bylaws. What object, which enchantments, and whose vault? The cup of Helga Hufflepuff, a Horcrux, and Bellatrix Lestrange. An hour later, the couple stepped out of the bank. It had taken quite a bit of argument back and forth to work out the details. In the end, Harry had claimed the entirety of the vault, though he only took the cup and several books. The rest he allowed the goblins to claim as a gesture of his goodwill. He also agreed to never reveal their interactions. The goblins would claim that a thief had broken in and during the fight the entire contents of the vault were destroyed in dragon fire. This allowed them to save face without alerting Bellatrix to the fact that the Horcrux was the real target. Harry never realized how much of an impression he had left on Bogrod. In the coming years, he would learn that he had earned a lifetime friendship that was unprecedented in goblin-human relations. November 22, 1997. A middle-aged couple walked arm in arm down Portobello Road. Despite her current form, Tonks was still excitedly pulling Harry along as she found various things that caught her attention. Harry's free arm was soon bogged down with various shopping bags full of trinkets he had bought for her. After several hours, they ducked into an alley and shrunk the bags, then proceeded to a quiet little restaurant. Their table was tucked away in a corner, and neither noticed as the waitresses gossiped together about the cute older couple who were still so obviously in love. After their meal, Harry grinned and pulled her along, enjoying her confusion until they entered the old theater. Then he laughed softly at her bouncing form as she excitedly asked about the show they were here to see. Sometimes, it was good to step away from the fight and be reminded about the good things in life. And Harry had promised her a date night every week. November 29, 1997. Harry was grateful that he knew about the potion he was currently staring down at, otherwise he might have been tempted to drink it himself. Instead, he conjured a small dog, cast the Imperius at it, and watched as it drank the lot. He had no qualms as he vanished it back to nothingness afterwards. With a glance to make sure Tonks was holding her own and guarding his back, he turned to the stone basin. His eyes popped open in surprise. Thetis. It's not. Here. What? She whipped around and moved quickly to his side. That's not it. Shit, she whispered. Well, maybe it will have a clue as to where the real one is. He nodded and picked up the locket. Folded inside was a small piece of paper that he carefully read. He breathed a sigh of relief that it was at least someone on their side that had taken it. Still, this could be a disaster. He looked up at Tonks. Do you know who RAB might be? She started. Give me that. Her brow scrunched in confusion as she read. I thought he. She trailed off. Thetis. Do you know who wrote that? She nodded. I think so. I've seen his writing before. But everyone always said, they told me he died loyal to Voldemort. Who? Regulus, Sirius' little brother. Harry gasped. A memory came to him of a locket, one that no one could open, and fear filled his heart. They had thrown it out. He grabbed Tonks' hand and started pulling her back to the boat. We have to go. Now. Neither spoke as they made their way back through the cave into the edge of the wards. Once there, Harry pulled her into his arms and they both disappeared. Her head spinning, she barely recognized the house before he was pulling her inside. He cast a quick spell and breathed a sigh of relief when it returned negative. They were alone, at least considering humans. Creature. December 2, 1997. Hedwig. I found a solution. We can get another owl that can deliver the mail and you can just avoid the wizard areas. That way no one will see you deliver mail and they'll think you are another owl. Hedwig turned one large amber eye at him. I'll just get a barn owl, they blend in well, and then I don't have to keep on using the post owls to deliver my mail. Hedwig started to keen, making a sound Harry had never heard before. It frightened him and he immediately started fussing over her. Hedwig, are you okay? What's wrong? Don't worry, you can rest and heal when I get the other owl. Screech. Do you not want another owl around here? She bobbed her head determinedly. Fine, I'll find another way. December 4, 1997. Harry was sitting in a chair by the fire, reading while idly listening to the small device broadcasting from the little bug that Tonks had planted in Order headquarters. Tonks herself was at the ministry, meeting with her boss. While she had been allowed the time off to continue their fight, she had to report in weekly on their progress. Harry wasn't paying very much attention. There was rarely any activity at headquarters unless there was a meeting going on, and so they always listened when there was, but right now it simply sounded like a routine discussion between Dumbledore and Moody, going over various plans for the safety of the school. But Harry's attention sharpened instantly when Moody asked how Malfoy was getting along. He could hear Dumbledore sigh. The boy still continues in his determination to fulfill his task. Did you know he tried to send a cursed necklace to me? Even if it hadn't been intercepted by young Rose Zeller, there was no way I wouldn't have spotted the curse. It is a shame about her injuries. Street. Mungos tells me they have every hope of her full recovery. And Severus still is unable to determine how he hopes to allow entrance into the castle. Yes. Despite repeated attempts, young Malfoy refuses to confide in him. But the boy is spending most of his time in the room of requirement working on something. The castle has blocked all of my attempts to gain access to the same room. That room always has been finicky. Why would Voldemort ever think Malfoy could succeed? Many more accomplished wizards have tried to kill you and never succeeded. Surely a barely of age boy cannot be expected to succeed where they have failed. It makes little sense to me. I believe it is more a punishment for Lucius' failures than an honest attempt on my life. Either that, or he fully intends on Severus carrying out the task in the end. He is fully aware of Severus' vow. Regardless, we are prepared for any eventualities. It sounded like Moody scoffed, though Harry couldn't be sure. Very well. I'll be on my way then, Albus. Harry sat, staring at the small radio. While he had his issues with Dumbledore, he certainly didn't want the man dead. Just then a pop sounded from the entryway and Tonks came into view. Her grin slid off her face as she caught sight of his face. Harry, something has come up. Draco Malfoy is trying to kill Dumbledore. December 11, 1997. Emmalini Vance knew that she was a goner. It had been her turn to search the countryside in a seemingly fruitless search for the Dementors. The Order knew that they posed a threat almost as bad as the Death Eaters, and that most people did not have the ability to fight back against them. Her own Patronus was sporadic at best, so she understood the populace' fear. She had just decided to head in for the night, her search having revealed nothing of substance, when the icy air started to creep into her bones. With dread, she turned around, only to have her worst fears confirmed. Frantically, she reached for her necklace that would allow her to send a message straight to the professor. She only hoped he would make it in time, as she could see black cloaked figures swarming closer with each second. It was not, however, the expected phoenix that swooped in to save her, but a pair of bright chameleons. As they danced and gambled around her, the ice in her heart began to let go, and she felt the brightness of hope for the first time in what felt like an unmeasurable amount of time. When she was finally able to lift her eyes and look towards her savior, she was shocked by what she saw. She recognized one of them instantly, for Nymphadora Tonks had been a close friend for years now, and she supposed the man with her must be her new beau, Harry Lewis. She, herself, had never met him, though Tonks had told her extensively about him during a recent lunch. She was shocked by their skill as they simultaneously directed their Patronus and wielded whips of fire to tightly control the Dementors. As she was watching, more pops of apparition signaled the arrival of the Order. Most of them seemed shocked to see Tonks and her friend already there. Only Dumbledore seemed to have almost been expecting it, though Emmalini noticed a hint of sadness as he looked from young Mr. Lewis to the Patronus that was still circling around her. He seemed oddly disappointed in it for some reason, as if he was hoping it would be something else. As the Order added their own Patronus to the mix, they all stared at Tonks and her friend, wondering what they were hoping to accomplish. Everyone knew that it was impossible to kill a Dementor, so why were they trying to do more than drive them off? As Tonks corralled the last one into the large net of fire she was controlling, young Lewis withdrew what looked like a small dart gun from his pocket. He then raised it to shoot at the Dementors. Many of the watching order members started to chuckle. The boy clearly didn't know what he was about. Their chuckling died instantly when the first darted connected and the Dementor it struck instantly disappeared. As they watched in astonishment, the demons were hit one by one until only the chill in the air remained of their presence. Dumbledore instantly made his way to the young couple. "Mr. Lewis, it is nice to see you again." Lewis nodded his head in acknowledgement as he unwrapped a chocolate bar and gave half to the young woman by his side before helping himself to the rest. "Do you mind me asking what was in those darts? I wasn't aware there was any way to harm a Dementor." The young man laughed, his hair flashing orange for a brief instant. "Oh, you can't. That doesn't mean, however, that they can't be contained. The goblins and I actually have a bet about how long it takes one to die of starvation." There was an audible gasp from the eagerly watching crowd. "You see, I sent them to a cave deep in goblin territory that is only accessible via those one-way portkey darts. The cave's door has been collapsed back under stone, so there is no hope of them ever getting out." The entire order stared at the young man in shock. No one had ever thought of that solution before. They had all simply assumed that because you couldn't harm the Dementors there was nothing to do but drive them off. None of those present recovered from their shock in enough time to stop the young couple from leaving. December 17, 1997. Rufus Scrimgeour was sitting at his desk, staring down at report after report that he could not understand. They were the Auror reports for the last month or so. Every single one of them claimed that when Aurors arrived on the scene after being called in, it was to discover that the Death Eaters had been put down by two small children. To make matters even more confusing, it was never the same two children. Shacklebolt had even visited all the apothecaries only to discover that no one had purchased enough materials to make even close to enough polyjuice potion to explain the transformations. It was a very sad day when the minister's best theory was that someone was training an army of very small children, children that should have been too young to so much as wield a wand, let alone use it with the efficiency displayed here. At the same time, he couldn't deny how grateful he was for the interference, whoever they were. In the last 2 months, he was finally able to admit that the war was finally turning around. It might even be that they were finally on the verge of winning. As 3 months ago he was certain the ministry was about to fall and that no one would even try to stop it, that was definitely a marked improvement and beyond even his most optimistic hopes. Now if only he could explain those darn children. December 19, 1997. Harry and Tonks were curled up together in front of the fire, enjoy a rare quiet night when a crack rang through the apartment. Instantly, both had wands aiming at the intruder, despite the fact that the apartment was warded tighter than Grimmauld Place. "Master," Creature bowed low to the ground. "I found the nasty thief for Master." Lowering his wand, Harry leaned forward eagerly. "Good job, Creature. Did he have Regulus Locket?" Nasty Thief admitted to taking Master Regulus Locket, but he has it no more. He says that bad woman found him and threatened death and he gave hers the locket for his nasty little life. Harry sighed in defeat. Did he say who she was? Nasty Thief did say that she was ugly short woman in a vile pink sweater. Umbrage. Harry hissed. "Thank you, Creature. You have done well. I will find the locket and destroy it for Master Regulus. Half-Blood Master is most kind." The elf bowed once more and disappeared with another sharp crack. December 20, 1997. Tonks, disguised as a 7-year-old child, was happily fighting away, taking a moment every now and then to check on Harry, when she noticed him freeze out of the corner of her eye. Ducking out of the way of an incoming spell, she looked over and realized instantly what had distracted him. Antonin Dolohov had just stepped out of the house they were fighting in front of to join the fight. She knew that Harry was still upset with the man for nearly having killed Hermione, and that he had been saving something special just for him. With a slash of his wand, Harry sent a jet of purple flame that was 2 meters long and nearly a half a meter wide at the man. It was so long that Dolohov was unable to dodge, and it cut him neatly in two with an arc across his chest. Harry spared time for a feral grin at the fallen man before turning to fight the next one. He may not be close to Hermione anymore, but she was once his best friend, and he would never forget the offenses against her. December 22, 1997. Harry and Tonks were currently ensconced in the defense section of Flourish and Blots. They could both feel that the end was coming and were anxious for any help they could get. They were also delaying the inevitable, for next up was a visit to Weasley's, Wizard Wheezes, and Harry was nervous about seeing the twins for the first time. He knew it would be hard for him not to give himself away to his friends, and the twins were exceptionally observant. It also saddened him that he had to deceive them. He missed them. Tonks sidled up to his side and placed a hand on his arm. "We have to go, love." He sighed and looked up. "I know, Thetis. She cradled his cheek in one hand and softly kissed his lips. "I know. It will be okay." He nodded and allowed her to guide him to the counter, then, their books shrunk in his pocket, they walked hand in hand down the alley to the garish building. Harry gave a quick glance around, grinning at the displays, before following Tonks into the back room where the defense things were stored. Harry had only gone through a third of the offerings, many of which had ended up in his arms, when the hairs on the back of his neck stood up and he stiffened. He took a steadying breath and carefully set his face before turning around. "Can I help you?" Fred asked, curiosity and wariness on his face. Tonks jumped to Harry's side. "Watch her, Fred." "Oh, hey Tonks. How are you?" Fred visibly relaxed. "Great. We're just checking some things out." Fred's eyes darted back to Harry. "Who's your friend?" "Oh, this is Harry Lewis." Fred's smile hitched for a moment before he stuck out his hand. "Fred Weasley, Mr. Lewis. I've heard a bit about you." Harry shook his hand and grinned. "And you guys have some interesting things here." Fred waggled his eyebrows. "And this is the boring room. Did you check out the stuff out front?" Harry chuckled. "Not today. Haven't had much time for jokes recently. We've been otherwise occupied." "Well, we can't have that." He grabbed Harry's arm and dragged him back into the main room. Harry followed along, grinning, as Fred explained the uses of the various products. By the time Harry made it to the counter with his purchases, he and Fred were getting along great and Harry was having to be careful not to bring anything up that would give him away. He was, however, relieved to discover that his easy friendship with the twins wasn't at all based on his fame. Fred seemed to like him just as much when he was of no consequence as when he was the chosen one. Harry spent a pile of galleons in the store, causing Fred to grin at him. "Thanks, mate." Fred glanced back at Tonks, who had been unusually quiet as Harry shopped, before giving a sudden nod. "We're about ready to close. You two want to join us for dinner?" Harry stiffened, his smile frozen on his face, so Tonks answered. "Is your mother cooking?" she asked. "Of course, we would never subject you to our cooking." Tonks giggled. "Good. We'll be there." She laced her arm through Harry's and led him out of the store and down a convenient side alley before apparating them back home. Harry collapsed on the sofa and put his face in his hands. "I don't know if I can go there, Thetis." She sat by his side and laced her fingers through his hair, gently scratching at his scalp. "You know it would have looked bad to refuse, and just make them more interested in meeting you. The entire order is curious about you." "I know, but I don't know how to act around them." She sighed. "Just remember to tell yourself to treat them as strangers." He nodded slightly. "And you'll have to send a Confundus charm at Molly's clock before anyone notices. You know they have a hand for you. You'll distract them." "Yep. Okay. Let's go." They popped into existence on the lane leading up the burrow, and Harry took in a deep, shuddering breath before continuing on. The door was thrown open before they reached it and Fred bounded out. "Tonks! Harry!" He turned and shouted back into the open doorway. "Oi, they're here!" Tonks giggled and pulled Harry into the front room. Her eyes widened in shock at who was sitting there. She hadn't been paying strict attention to the outside world and so was shocked to discover that Ron, Hermione, and Ginny were home from Hogwarts. Tonks turned to Harry, whose jaw was clenched tightly. He nodded at her to let her know he was ready, and Tonks turned and bounded forward, crashing spectacularly into the couch and falling onto its inhabitants. No one noticed Harry shoot a spell at the clock, and one hand gradually moved back to lost. "Sorry," Tonks exclaimed as she untangled herself from Ron. Molly clucked as she stepped forward. "Really, Tonks, you should be more careful." She brushed off the younger woman before turning to her children and checking they were uninjured. Finally, she turned to Harry. "Oh, how rude of me. I'm Molly Weasley, dear." Harry smiled at her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Weasley. Thank you for inviting us. I'm Harry Lewis." The entire room started at his name, and more than one set of eyes shot quickly to the clock only to turn back, disappointed. Mr. Weasley stepped forward and offered his hand. Albus mentioned Tonks had brought back a friend. "Welcome to England, Mr. Lewis." "Harry is fine, sir." Are you really from America? Harry turned to meet Hermione's gaze. Your accent is unusual. I've spent quite a bit of time there, but my parents are English. And how did you meet Tonks? Harry shot Tonks a look and received a confirming nod. I needed her assistance. With what? In answer, Harry's hair and eyes cycled through several colors before returning to their previous dirty blonde and light blue. You're a metamorph. Yes, Miss Granger. Hermione Granger. Oh, I'm sorry, Harry. Let me introduce everyone. Molly bustled to his side. You met my husband, Arthur. Our three eldest aren't here, but this is Fred and George, and then our Ron and Ginny. Hermione is here as their friend. Harry smiled in greeting at everyone, though he skipped quickly over the trio on the couch. It was painful to see them there, happy without him. Of course, he realized that was mostly his doing. Molly guided them into the kitchen and offered Harry a seat as the kids sat around them. Harry grinned at the large quantities of food as everyone started to dish themselves up. It wasn't until he filled his plate and looked up that he noticed Hermione was sitting opposite him and looking at him curiously. Did you have more questions, Miss Granger? She flushed, but nodded. You seem a little old to just be learning how to control your abilities. He shrugged. There were some issues to overcome. It took a bit of time to discover the reason why they had been suppressed. I didn't show obvious signs until about a year ago. What was suppressing them? My magic. It was helping me with my desire to blend in. It took rather drastic actions to overcome that. Her eyes gleamed. What did you do? He raised an eyebrow. That's rather personal. She flushed. Oh, sorry. There was an awkward silence over the table until Ron cleared his throat and asked, Do you play Quidditch? Not really. I do like to fly, however. It was actually a more truthful answer than he would have thought even a year ago. He would be content to never play a game again, but he would never give up flying. Ever been to a game? Not for several years. If you don't mind me asking, Ginny spoke. How old are you? Almost 21. Ginny shot a look at Tonks who just shrugged. Harry was aware that many would see her as too old for him, despite the fact that he had inflated his age. However, he didn't think he could reasonably pass for much older. You aren't a member of the Order, though. No. Why not? Hermione asked. I refuse to take the oath or submit my mind to Dumbledore. Several people bristled at this, and Hermione narrowed her eyes. How do we know we can trust you? You don't. I have learned from the mistakes of those who have gone before me. Only once have I given my oath and complete trust, and that must suffice. And who has that oath? Thetis. Tonks flushed and stuck her elbow in his side. I mean, Tonks. That seems like a harsh outlook on life, mate. Harry eyed them carefully. Have you ever had a trusted friend let you down? The twins shrugged. Yeah, a family member. His eyes roamed across the table and watched as most everyone nodded. Someone in authority that you trusted completely. There were fewer nods. I have seen what could happen if you offer your will or your mind freely. Aren't you a little lonely? Ron asked. I am content. Arthur cleared his throat. Where did you live before, Harry? Harry smiled gratefully at the man. Most recently, New York City. It offered me the ability to further many of my interests in a fair amount of anonymity. Harry shrugged. I'm not a very social person. You lived among Muggles, then? Yes, sir. The rest of dinner passed with conversation about various Muggle contraptions. When Molly set down a selection of desserts, Harry purposely stayed away from the treacle tart, despite how good it looked. It was better to be cautious. They retired to the front room after dinner while Molly cleaned up the dishes. Arthur had pulled Tonks aside to discuss something. Fred and George were whispering in the corner, and Hermione was supervising as Ron and Ginny played chess. Harry sat nearby, and listened as they discussed school things. His chest tightened as he watched. And yet, it reaffirmed his decision to stay away from them. By leaving, he allowed them the last few years of their childhood. If he had stayed, there was no way that Ron would be beeping about homework while the girls talked and giggled together. There was mention of Terry Boot, and Ginny was flushed, so Harry was fairly certain he knew what they must be talking about. Ginny seemed content with Boot, and there was never any mention of the real Harry. His eyes moved over to where Tonks was seriously talking to Arthur. His eyes met hers and she waggled her eyebrows at him, always able to inject liveliness and yet remain serious when it was necessary. He had made the right choice, and wished Ginny joy in the rest of her youth. It was something he had never had, and he was loath to steal hers from her. As he sat and watched, Harry decided that he wasn't ever going to come back as himself. They were happy, and he would leave them to it. He had enjoyed the companionship they had offered him as Harry Lewis, without having to suffer any of the drawbacks that had always come with being Harry Potter. Yes, he was content. Tonks allowed Arthur to pull her into a corner, but she kept glancing back at Harry. He was watching his friends, but she couldn't detect any pain in his gaze. She could tell he was happy to see them, but he seemed satisfied just to watch. She stiffened as Harry's gaze settled on Ginny. She had been worried about the first time Harry saw her, and he had in fact avoided looking at the younger girl during dinner. But he wasn't looking at her with any longing that Tonks could detect. Rather, his gaze was oddly calculating. His eyes shot to her and he smiled softly at her, and in his eyes she could see how happy he was with himself. Tonks breathed a sigh of relief, and returned his smile. December 27, 1997. The Death Eaters had heard the rumors that were racing through the Ministry about the two children that showed up at many of their recent raids and always fought to kill. So when Kellen Viterman saw them running in from the edge of the wards, they had placed a feeling of dread shot through his heart. He just knew he was going to die, and he could only hope it would be quick and relatively painless. Honestly, it might be nice to escape from the constant torture the Dark Lord liked to use as motivation for his followers. On the off chance that he escaped, he didn't want the Dark Lord to kill him for failing to perform his task, so he focused all his attention on finding the mudblood he had been tasked with killing. But the squealing soon pulled his notice once again, and his shock at what he saw caused all thought of his assigned mission to leave him. Pettigrew was leading the mission today, and had been supervising the younger recruits from outside. But the children had found him, and they seemed to have a personal vendetta against the animagus, because the male child seemed to be toying with him while the female kept everyone away from them. Kellen shook himself and decided to cut his losses. He was getting out of here. Rita Skeeter pranced through the main floor of the Prophet towards her office, making sure to shoot glares at certain individuals who thought they could try and steal her spot at the top. She had shown them. Her year in forced retirement may have set her career back, but nothing would keep Rita down for long. And eventually she would find some dirt on that Granger chit that was airtight, and she would get her revenge. When she opened her door, she stopped cold. There was a dead body on her desk, and it was cut up fairly badly and bleeding all over her beautiful mahogany antique Chippendale. It was a good thing that she had placed an imperturbable charm on it when she bought it. She had learned her lesson when her previous desk had been destroyed in a similar incident. She crept carefully over only to shriek in surprise when she recognized him. She didn't even need the large note stuck to his chest. Peter Pettigrew, the real betrayer of the Potters. Then she grinned evilly. Oh, was there a story there? Heads were going to roll in the Ministry over this. December 29, 1997. Harry watched as Tonks morphed into an older woman and transfigured her clothes into a gray suit that was wrinkled and slightly ill-fitting. He examined her carefully, comparing her to the photograph in his hand before nodding his approval. "And here I thought you would never ask me to change into another person." He rolled his eyes. "For me? I would never ask you to do that for me. This is for a mission. It's different." She laughed. "I know. You ready for this?" "Of course." She winked at him and leaned up to give him a key, but he turned his head. You look like someone, it's a little weird." She smiled softly. "You really are perfect for me." "Thank you, Harry." She took a deep breath and turned on the spot, disappearing only to reappear in the Ministry atrium. She waited in a corner until the familiar pink-covered form appeared. Then she ran out. "Madam Umbridge." "Madam." The toad-like woman turned with a scowl on her face to see who had dared to delay her exit. "Mafalda, what could you possibly want? I just got a reading on an old trace that Minister Fudge had me set up, and I thought you might want to know about it." "Well, what was it, woman?" "The Potter trace, ma'am." Umbridge's beady eyes glinted with greed, and her thick fingers closed tightly around Mafalda's arm. "Take me there immediately." "Of course." Umbridge looked at her carefully as they walked. "Did you tell anyone else about this?" "No, I came straight to you." "Good. I'll make sure you have a letter of commendation added to your file in the morning." "Thank you, ma'am." They cleared the atrium, and Umbridge's grasp became tighter as Mafalda guided her apparition. She had a brief glimpse of a small, dark room before a spell hit her in the face. Tonks' form instantly shifted, and she threw Umbridge's hand off of her arm in disgust. "Ah, the woman disgusts me." Harry chuckled. "You don't have to convince me. She tried to kill me, remember?" His eyes tensed and he lowered his occlumency barriers from around the Horcrux in his head, allowing a small tendril out to seek out its fellow. He was rather surprised to find it on her, having thought she would keep it in her home and they would have to interrogate it out of her. Instead, it was hanging around her neck. The next morning a new patient was admitted to St. Mungo's long-term care ward. No one knew what had happened to the former undersecretary, but her symptoms were surprisingly reminiscent of Gilderoy Lockhart's, so they placed her in a bed next to him and tried to make her comfortable. No one was able to access a dirty house in the center of London where an old house elf proudly wore the now destroyed locket that his beloved master had died to find. If they had, they might have been surprised to hear the old elf muttering about his wonderful half-blood master. After all, it was rather out of character. June 3, 1997. Harry was sitting in the park, enjoying a rare afternoon off from his studies. He liked this little corner of the park, as it was tucked away and few ever came here. He could sit and be completely surrounded by the peacefulness of nature. He tilted his head back against the bench behind him and closed his eyes, letting the breeze calm his mind. The sound of rushing feet startled him and he sprang out of his seat. His wand was hidden down a holster on his ankle, but it was dangerous for him to even think of using it, so he had taken to carrying a knife with him. Today was the first time he had ever drawn it. A man, who looked like shite, came running into the little clearing Harry was occupying. The man did not notice Harry, for he was too focused on the figure that was chasing him. Harry's jaw dropped when a knife flew through the air and embedded itself in the man's leg, taking him down to the ground immediately. After several moments, a middle-aged man of no great appearance walked calmly into the clearing as if he hadn't a care in the world. He was twirling another knife in his hand. He glanced in Harry's direction, and seemed to decide he wasn't a threat before making his way towards the downed man. He knelt down by the man's side and whispered to him too low for Harry to hear, then his hand came up and the knife flashed. It was too fast for Harry to make out what he did. Then the man stood up smugly and turned his back on the whimpering man. He calmly made his way over to Harry. He stared at Harry for several minutes in complete silence. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "You interest me, young man." Okay. You did not flinch when I reminded the traitor behind us of what he had to lose if he strayed again. You have seen much violence in your life. Yes, and you carry that knife as if you actually would use it if you had to. But I wonder, do you really know how to use it? I've practiced some. I haven't been forced to use it yet. I've been safe here, so far. Interesting. I believe I will teach you how to wield it correctly. I am in need of a diversion. Thank you, sir. The man barked out a laugh. Never call me sir. You may call me Geo. January 3, 1998. Harry, I don't like this. Tonks was pacing in front of the couch where Harry was sitting, her hands gesticulating wildly as she talked. It was bad enough you had to do it once, but what if he catches you this time? What if he figures out a way to reverse the connection? I refuse to lose you over this, Harry Potter. Harry smiled at her. Thetis, you worry too much. He stood up slowly and captured her hands as she passed in front of him, bringing her to a halt. This is the last piece of him, besides the one in me, and we know how to get rid of that one. But I refuse to wait around for months or years while we try and find that stupid snake, because every day we wait more people will die. She sighed in resignation. You swear you are just going to get the snake's location and then get out, no hanging around and dilly-dallying. He chuckled. No, dear. Just in and out to get the information we need. Fine. She huffed and crossed her arms angrily over her chest, watching as he sat back down on the couch and sunk into his mind. For agonizing minutes she waited, as his face would screw up in pain and terror, then relax again. At one point he flinched so hard she actually brought her wand up to wake him before talking herself out of it and resuming her wait. Finally, his face smoothed and his eyes opened. An evil smirk crossed his face. She's out hunting right now. Let's go. Tonks' grin matched his as they quickly dressed and prepared. It was her turn to pick a form, and she shrunk to child's body with brown hair and black eyes. With a grin, he matched her height, but reversed the coloring. Then he took her hand and with a quiet pop they were gone. They appeared in a wooded area that was oppressively dark. Without a sound, the pair slowly stalked through the trees, eyes scanning for any sign of the large snake. It took over 2 hours before they saw the first sign, a regurgitated carcass of some kind of small mammal. It took another 20 minutes for Harry's head to pop up. He pointed off to his right where he could hear hissing. They made it to within 10 feet of her before she noticed them, and then she turned around sharply and attacked straight at Tonks, who was closest. Tonks was immediately shooting spells at a furious pace, while Harry took advantage of the snake's distraction to pull the large sword from the scabbard at his back. Once Tonks saw that Harry was in position, she upped the level of her spells, and squinted through the spell fire as the light glinted off the sword of Gryffindor as it cleanly sliced through the massive snake's head. Both of them instantly jumped back as the lower half of the snake went into death convulsions and the upper half, with its deadly fangs, went flying. As the snake finally stilled, they had to shield their eyes as a brilliant green light filled the little clearing in the woods. By the time the light died down, an alarm was sounding from the large mansion up on the hill. With a glance at each other, the two turned instantly on their heels. When nothing happened, Tonks cursed. Apparition wards. With another glance, they both started sprinting away from the mansion. And hopefully towards the edge of the wards. Apparently, Voldemort had a closer connection to his familiar than they thought. January 7, 1998. The young witch that manned the Auror emergency response flow was having a rather uneventful Wednesday. Things had calmed down around here recently, and there had been a noticeable drop in the number of distress calls recently. The rumor among the Aurors was that the Death Eaters were rapidly falling in the numbers due to the intervention of a slew of seeming children. She jumped slightly when the flow flared brightly, and a distressed man's face appeared in the middle of the flames. She immediately sat forward. "What's the emergency, sir? Our wards are under massive attack, and I don't think they will hold much longer. Can you and your family flow to safety?" "No. The flow seems to be blocked. Only the emergency override allowed me to make this call. Can you tell me your location?" 2 kilometers outside of St. Keen, near Liskeard, Cornwall. Coordinates 50.440823, -4.453378. "Okay, sir. I'm sending orders to help." She looked up and nodded at the men standing around her. "Can you tell me anything else about the situation? I can hear a woman cackling like a mad hyena." The Auror team, that was already halfway towards the outgoing flow, all stopped in their tracks. Without being asked, the backup team jumped to the ready and hurried to join them. "The Aurors will be there momentarily, sir." The face nodded and promptly disappeared. The next 20 minutes were an agonizing wait for the young witch. She had sent a message immediately to the minister's office that it appeared Bellatrix Lestrange was personally leading an attack at the moment, and for the second half of her vigil she was desperately trying not to fidget as the minister himself sat by her side, waiting for news. When the flow flared once more, she was instantly on her feet, the minister at her side. As was becoming somewhat usual, a series of bodies preceded the Aurors out of the fire, but these bodies caused her to draw in a sharp breath. 2 young men, bound tightly in ropes as their eyes roamed madly around the room came first, then 2 men whose faces she knew well. After all, they were plastered on the wall behind her, Rabaston and Rodolphus Lestrange. These 2 were clearly not spared, and the chains around them were merely for show, since the brothers were both obviously dead. And then, following her husband out of the fire, was the Mad Witch herself. Bellatrix seemingly took the brunt of the attacks, as she was quite literally in pieces. They hadn't even bothered to tie her up. A cheer went through the room at the sight, and only grew louder as the Aurors returned with nothing more damaging than some torn robes and a single bloodied arm. The minister immediately made his way towards the lead Auror, and with a single glance asked for a report. "They beat us there, again, Minster. A boy and girl, no older than 10, just like always." The boy was already engaged with Bellatrix, while still shielding from the lads, while the girl took on the brothers. When we arrived, the boy calmly ordered us to take care of the younger lads, and then turned back to his fight, completely confident that we would do as he said. "And sir, I have never seen such power." He took out Bellatrix and then calmly turned and helped the girl take down the brothers. Then, before I could stop them, they were gone. Scrimgeour grunted in frustration. "Were you able to learn anything about them? I've never seen such fluid movements, him more than her, though she was close behind. And I swear I saw him throwing something, possibly knives." They had an immediate effect when they hit, so they might have been coated with poison. We'll have a healer autopsy the bodies and look into that. Good work, Jonathan. Yes, sir. With a final nod to the minister, the Auror walked to the wall where the most wanted and dangerous criminals were displayed. With a flick of his wand, 3 large X's were drawn, causing another cheer to go up. January 10, 1998. Tonks woke Harry up in a most pleasurable manner, and refused to allow him to leave the bed for nearly 3 hours. He didn't protest this, as he knew she was worried about what they intended to do today. When they finally rose, they cleared a large space in the floor and retrieved the ritual bowl that Agent Webb had given them. They each made a small cut on their right palms, then clasped them tightly together, allowing their blood to mingle before filling the bowl. After healing their hands, Harry carefully drew a large runic circle on the floor with their mingled blood. When he was done, he lay down in the center and Tonks took over. She drew runes over nearly every inch of his body. She then stepped out of the circle. Taking her wand, she placed it carefully against the charging rune and whispered a long incantation. A brilliant purple web of light exploded from the runes, so bright that Tonks could no longer see Harry on the floor. That was when the screaming started. The web of light flashed a brilliant red and a second scream joined Harry's. A wave of magic exploded out and Tonks knew no more. She woke up to frantic kisses and gentle caresses. She blinked her eyes open to see Harry looking down at her, his hair and eyes both cycling through colors. Interesting. But she didn't have long to think about it, because Harry was soon keying her, and then shortly thereafter loving her, and thought was no longer possible. January 13, 1998. Lucius was worried. He was the last of Voldemort's inner circle left, and he knew that was only because the Dark Lord thought him such a failure he was no longer sent out to lead raids. In fact, Voldemort had instead sent Draco on a suicide mission, and Lucius knew it was part of his punishment. At least Narcissa had managed to get that vow out of Severus. Hopefully, his son would not be forced to pay with his life for Lucius' mistakes. There was a ping on the wards, and Lucius looked up curiously. No one besides family and those who bore his lord's mark could get through the wards, so he was not too concerned. Of course, he had not heard from Voldemort in over a week, and he was actually grateful that Bellatrix and her husband had been gone just as long. He supposed his mad sister-in-law must be back and grimaced. With a resigned sigh he walked into the entryway, not letting his disquiet show. Sure enough, Bella and Rodolphus stood by the door. The Mad Witch seemed to be in an amorous mood as she was rubbing against her husband like a whore trying to entice her next client. Rodolphus was clearly enjoying the attention, but was feigning enough indifference to encourage Bella. Lucius knew the couple, when like this, could get quite aggressive with each other. He only hoped they waited until they were behind closed doors first. The last time they did that he had been forced to avoid his front hall for nearly 15 hours. Bella, Rodolphus, welcome back. I see you will be indisposed for the evening. I'll make sure your meals are sent up. He turned to leave them alone, sickened by the fact that Bella had put one hand down her own pants and another down her husband's right in front of him. He was immobilized without even hearing a spell cast. His eyes widened as Bella morphed before his eyes to a form he knew well, his wife's traitorous niece. He didn't know she could get through the wards. She was black, but had been cast out. But what about the man? His features too morphed, but Lucius didn't recognize him. His question must have shown on his face, because the stranger smirked before shoving a 3-inch blade into his stomach. Your wards are black family magic, Lucy. They can never keep out the head of that family. Lucius' eyes flicked to Tonks. Oh, and I welcomed her back into the family months ago. Didn't you know? Lucius slowly bled out, unable to make a sound, while the couple evidently decided they needed to watch him die. Of course, they didn't watch much. He hadn't thought any couple could beat the Lestranges for lewdness. January 15, 1998. It was George's turn to patrol for more Dementors tonight, so naturally Fred had come with him. The two were smart enough to send for help the moment they felt a slight drop in temperature. There was no point in being unnecessarily brave when it came to Dementors. Their Patronesses, a matching pair of 9-tailed foxes, were soon circling them. Yet even with this protection they both breathed a sigh of relief when the crack of apparition sounded through the night and the Order members started to appear. Instantly Bill's Patronus of a Sphinx was circling around their own, before pushing towards the Dementors that were approaching. But it was the appearance of a blue-haired Tonks and green-haired Harry that removed the last fear from their hearts. Instantly the pair was helping to herd the foul creatures before Harry started hitting them with his little portkey darts. When the last Dementor had been sent away, the Order collectively turned to the two metamorphogi. "Thanks for the help, mates," Fred, or maybe George, cheerfully said. Harry gave a slight smile. "No trouble at all. Glad we could help." This caused Bill Weasley to step up. "Couldn't you help a lot more if you actually consented to join us in our fight?" He did not sound pleased. Harry looked at him calmly. "Who says I'm not joining? We have come every time you have asked, and those are just the ones you are aware of." The tall man scowled. "That's not what I mean and you know it. The two of you have the ability to run missions that the rest of us can't. You should be honored to help. Instead you refuse. What if you were just spying for Voldemort? How do we know you were really on our side? It is really none of your business to question me, which is precisely why I refuse to swear allegiance to your order. I will give no man my unquestioned allegiance, not even Albus Dumbledore." Bill winced at the man's name before quickly hiding his reaction. "And that is what I can't understand. Albus Dumbledore has fought his entire life for the light and will always be remembered as a hero. If we can't trust him, then who can we? That is your own decision to make, Mr. Weasley. We will come and fight by your side as long as you desire. That is all I can offer you." Without another word, he took Tonks' hand and disappeared. May 10, 1997. Harry was taking a short break and wandering the paths of Central Park. On his way back, he could see a large crowd gathered to watch some kind of street performer or demonstration and debated taking the longer way home to avoid them. Then he shrugged and decided to see what it was. He made his way easily through the crowd, not realizing that his magic was flaring slightly to push his way through, and came to a stop before a large circle of young men about his age that were surrounding a pair that were mock fighting. His training allowed him to recognize the amazing skill the men displayed, but it was the easy way they moved and seemed to glide around each other that shocked him. They almost seemed to be dancing as they fought. Then one of the young men took a running jump and flipped over the other with a twist, landing easily on his feet. Harry's eyes widened. This looked amazingly useful. He noticed that there was a stack of pamphlets on the ground and ducked down to pick one up. Their school was located on a few blocks from here on 9th Avenue. He was going to have to check it out. January 18, 1998. Harry was sitting brooding in front of the fireplace when Tonks came home from meeting with Amelia Bones. She quietly took a seat by his side and waited for him to speak. "I've been thinking about what Bill let slip the other day." She nodded her head to indicate it had been on her mind too. "I think the Order is preparing for Dumbledore to die. We knew that there was a plot against him. Maybe the Order doesn't know how to stop it. I don't think that is it. I know how Dumbledore thinks and I believe he would give up his own life for the opportunity to save Draco's. I don't think he will even try to stop it. You heard how he did nothing to stop Draco's first clumsy attempts." Tonks hesitated a moment before replying. "Do you really think he would allow Draco to bring Death Eaters into Hogwarts unopposed? Oh, I'm sure he'll have Order members there and he'll be convinced they can protect the students. But do we really want to take that risk? I would rather that Draco Malfoy, a boy who has been determined to follow this path his entire life, was killed than any innocent at Hogwarts." She thought for several moments before nodding her agreement. "What should we do? I still have the Marauders map. I say we track him down tonight and end this." "Okay." Harry pulled out the map from his pocket and set to work locating Draco's dot. He finally found it heading up the main staircase from the Great Hall. The boy had probably just finished dinner. He watched as Draco kept on climbing. "Let's go now. He's alone and I don't want to lose him. It will take us ages to walk up to the castle. You know we can't apparate in. I didn't plan on it. I thought we might call in reinforcements." With a smirk, he stood up. "Fox." She stared at him with wide eyes, certain he was crazy to expect the Phoenix to come to his call. But she was never able to voice this thought, for a flash of flames appeared suddenly between them and materialized into the magnificent red and gold bird. Harry smiled at his friend. "It is lovely to see you, Fox. I wonder if you might take Tonks and me to Hogwarts the quick way. I'm concerned about Dumbledore." The Phoenix let out a trill filled with sadness and a touch of anxiousness. "You, too." A decisive nod from the majestic bird. "I want to save his life, Fox. He is worth more than a stupid schoolboy hell-bent on murder." Will you take us? Fawkes nodded and rose up from his perch on the back of the couch. With a shake of his tail feathers he invited them to take hold, and then they were gone. They appeared in a deserted hallway in the 6th floor, and instantly the two were huddling close under Harry's invisibility cloak. With a trill, Fawkes left them alone. Cautiously they crept forward until they could just see Draco climbing the stairs to a very familiar corridor in the 7th floor. Sharing a brief glance they followed, well aware that the room could keep them out if they didn't make it before he shut the door. When Draco had stepped into a large ornate door, Harry flicked his wand and sent a silent spell. It would freeze the boy for just under a minute, and usually the victim wasn't even aware of the lost time. They carefully moved around him and into the room, having to bite down on their tongues to hide their shock. They had seen this room before. Malfoy led them down several rows and stopped in front of a large cabinet. They watched silently for several minutes, listening as he talked aloud, before they realized what the cabinet was for. Tonks' wide-eyed look told Harry she agreed with his assessment. They could not allow the Malfoy boy to succeed in his plan. The same spell froze him in place and Harry stepped out from under the cloak. He shoved Malfoy into the cabinet, then stepped back and took a deep breath before sending an overpowered reducto straight at it. Tonks appeared, a smile on her lips. They had saved Dumbledore, and the entire school from invasion. It was a good night. Dumbledore was meeting with Severus in his office when Fawkes gave a happy trill and disappeared in a ball of flame. The Dour Potions master raised one thin eyebrow in silent question. Dumbledore shrugged. He does that sometimes. He'll be back. With a careless shrug he ignored the strange behavior of his familiar and turned back to the man before him. You are still unable to determine how Draco plans on executing his plans. Yes. The lad has let nothing slip, which is unusual for him. But I worry, he has become almost gleeful this past week. I think it is getting closer, and I am troubled. Are you sure this is the course you wish to take? Yes, Severus. We must do all we can to save every innocent soul, including Mr. Malfoy. The two men sat in silence for several minutes, each contemplating the possibilities that Malfoy might be attempting. Dumbledore was staring down at his hands when a strangled noise made him look up quickly. Severus was fighting an unseen force that appeared to be choking the life out of him. Dumbledore's eyes widened in shock. He knew that reaction, it was the result of an unbreakable vow being broken. But the only vows the man had made were to him, to swear his loyalty, and to Bellatrix to help young. With a start Dumbledore understood. Severus was paying the ultimate price because Draco had failed, and the only way that Draco could fail without his knowledge was if the lad had died. With sad eyes, Dumbledore watched as Severus lost the fight. There was no way he could stop it and nothing he could do to help the man. Then he called the castle ghosts together and asked them to commence a search for the body of Draco Malfoy. It would never be found. January 19, 1998. Dumbledore had spent all night mourning young Severus, and sometime around 3 in the morning he had reached a conclusion that greatly disturbed him. It caused him to send Fawkes, once the bird finally returned from wherever he had disappeared, to young Nymphadora asking for an immediate meeting with her and young Mr. Lewis. Fawkes returned with a missive from the young witch which spent several lines abusing his every ancestor for waking her. He had forgotten what time it was when he sent the note, and stating that they would be there at 9 in the morning and no sooner. So Dumbledore was pacing in his office, awaiting their imminent arrival. The wards had let him know a few minutes ago that they had entered the gate, but he knew from much experience that it was a long walk up. When they did finally reach his office, he was hard-pressed not to glare at them. Instead his customary grandfatherly twinkle was fixed firmly on his face. But his eyes held a grain of steel in them. He wanted answers. Welcome Nymphadora, Mr. Lewis. Please do make yourselves comfortable. He gestured lazily at the chairs in front of his desk. The young witch glared at him for the use of her given name before flouncing over and sprawling across one side of the loveseat. Her lover walked more sedately and seated himself with grace which only slightly masked the tension in his body. He looked like a great cat ready to pounce on his prey. What can we help you with, sir? He asked quietly. Something of a very grave nature occurred here yesterday, and I am hoping you can help me with it. I witnessed my dear friend Severus Snape die from an unfulfilled magical vow. The boy's eyes widened with genuine shock. I am sorry to hear that. I did not know the man myself, but I realize it is hard to lose a friend. But I am confused as to how you think we can help with this. I have never met the man, let alone know what he could have vowed to do. Severus vowed, in his efforts to spy for the light, to help a young man by the name of Draco Malfoy accomplish a task he was given by Voldemort. Dumbledore watched as both sets of eyes watching him narrowed briefly. The only way his vow could have been deemed unfulfilled at the time of his death was if Mr. Malfoy preceded him in death. As you two have been demonstrating an unusual level of knowledge in recent months about the movements of both sides in this war, I wonder if you might have any knowledge about Mr. Malfoy's unfortunate demise. I'm afraid I never had the pleasure of meeting young Malfoy. From what I have heard of the young man, however, I cannot help but think that the world is a much better place without him in it. That being said, I cannot help you, sir. Dumbledore sighed. It was obvious to him the young man was hiding something, but he wondered if it was worth pushing any more. Severus was already beyond help, and he didn't want to alienate the two talented individuals in front of him. He knew he would never get young Lewis to admit to anything, and he had already learned that the boy had the most unusual occlumency shields he had ever encountered. The only time he had tried to breach them had not been a pleasant experience, to say the least. Very well. Thank you for satisfying the curiosity of an old man. A few more inconsequential pleasantries were exchanged before the two left. Dumbledore wondered if he would ever be able to crack the young man's hard exterior. January 21, 1998. Hedwig. I have an idea. She looked at him carefully before nodding for him to continue. I can get you an invisibility cloak to wear when you go out. Then you'll be protected. She glared at him before taking flight out of the room. He didn't see her for the next month. January 26, 1998. Remus was in trouble, and he knew it. Dumbledore had begged him to go back to the pack and try and win some to their side, and even though Remus knew it was a lost cause, he went anyways. His life was pointless these days, he may as well try and be useful. First it was Sirius, then Harry, and then even Nymphadora left him. What was the point of carrying on? He missed his friends, his family, so much that it was an almost constant ache. Tonight he might just get his wish to see James and Sirius again, for Greyback had shown up unexpectedly and he knew he was no match for the older wolf. Remus was just grateful it wasn't a full moon tonight, as that would have meant he died that much quicker. On second thought, that might have been a better option. He had sent in the distress signal to the Order, but he knew that no one would be able to help. The pack wouldn't let strangers in and he was deep in their territory tonight. Even Dumbledore would be unable to reach him. And if they tried to mount a full-scale assault, the only thing that would have a hope of getting through, it would take entirely too long to be of any use besides retrieving his broken body. So he was resigned to dying and was almost looking forward to seeing his friends. If only he had got to see Harry one last time and know that the pup was okay. Ah, well, such was his life, it had never been fair. He had been fighting for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 5 minutes or so, frantically using his magic to keep the older and larger wolf out of physical contact range, when two figures he recognized well came into his view. Stalking towards him, his heart sunk as any hope he had of making it out of this alive was completely and utterly quashed. Titian was known for being one of Greyback's best enforcers, and Clara was his maiden just as fierce. At least his death would be quicker with those two helping Greyback. His surprise was so great that he stopped fighting momentarily when they instead stepped to his sides and started fighting with him. And his shock was nothing next to that displayed by Greyback. Remus could practically feel the anger rolling off the wolf at the betrayal. Drawn by Greyback's furious howl, the rest of the pack started to watch, and Remus was further surprised to realize that many of the surrounding wolves seemed to be cheering for him. Maybe he had got through to some of them. Or maybe they were just sick of Greyback and hopeful that someone might finally take him down. The next few minutes were a blur, and he didn't fully come to until he found Greyback dead at his feet, though he was positive it wasn't by his wand. The crowd seemed to think it was, and the surrounding wolves voting to make him the alpha, on Titian's recommendation of all things. What in the blazes had happened? It would be 3 days before he could get away from the pack to chat with Dumbledore and find out. The only ones who had responded to his call for help had been Tonks and her boyfriend, Harry Lewis, a man Remus hadn't even met yet. They must have encountered Titian and Clara separated from the pack and overcome them, then assumed their forms, thus getting around the pack security easily. And then they had come to his aid. Remus wondered why they had bothered. It was no secret in the order that Nymphadora was somewhat cold to him now, and Louis had no reason to risk his life just for Remus, Sake. He didn't even know the boy. It was all so odd. February 1, 1998. No one looked twice at another young couple attending the Green Day concert at Astoria Theater. They looked to be about 16, though it was hard to tell with their behavior belying their apparent youth. The boy was sporting spiky blonde hair tipped with blue and the girl had equally spiky vivid red hair with green woven throughout. Both had on dark eye makeup that drew attention to the unusual color of their eyes, vivid gold. They were both dressed in tight shirts, his a tank top and hers a halter that barely covered much, and leather bottoms, he with pants and she in a short skirt and leather spike heels. Truthfully, they looked much like the other concert attenders in dress and age. The only thing that drew any second glances was the number of tattoos lining his toned arms, as he was a little young for so much artwork. The girl was unmarked, but had numerous piercings including a sparkling jewel that drew every eye to her bare stomach. Only those who looked closely realized that it was in fact actually a ring hanging from a hook. The large center stone appeared to be a 5-carat black opal, and its color was enhanced by the stones on either side. One was a 3-carat red diamond and the other an equally large red beryl emerald. Of course, most didn't realize what the stones were, having never expected to see such rare gems displayed in quite such a way. The crowd was simply mesmerized by the effect of the sparkling stones against the toned stomach of the young woman. They might have found themselves the subject of much more aggressive interest from the opposite if it wasn't obvious that no one stood a chance with either of them, but everyone who watched them realized that there was no hope of coming between them and limited themselves to strictly enjoying the lewdness of the show provided. The couple danced tightly together throughout the concert and often ventured towards the obscene with their displays of affection, seeming completely oblivious to their avidly watching audience. If it wasn't for the fact that they were clearly enjoying the music, an observer might have thought that the two weren't even aware of where they were. The girl sang along to all the songs, and the final encore of Good Riddance caused her to squeal in excitement. The boy merely laughed at her antics and pulled her closer. His hand often found its way to the ring at her navel as they danced, as if drawn there. No one in the audience recognized it for what it was because of their apparent young age, but the boy knew, and he was constantly reminding himself of its presence to convince himself it was real. He was still coming down off the high from her having accepted the ring along with his hand. His mind was already making plans, as he was ready for that ring to be joined by the matching bands he had purchased, which would grace a place a little more private than the third finger of their left hands. He wondered how soon he could finish his task to allow that to happen. February 3, 1998. Bogrod had come through once again. Gleefully Harry unpacked box after box of little pebbles that the goblin swore would do what they wished. They had even been supplied at cost, a courtesy the shrewd goblin was only extending because of their intended use. But Harry had a feeling it had more to do with who had asked for them than what they were being used for. He was just starting to realize the benefits of a good relationship with the goblins of Gringotts. Tonks was across the room, repeatedly casting at a shimmering shield emanating from one of the small pebbles to test its resilience. She gave up before it even faltered. February 5, 1998. An old man walked slowly into the sitting room of the apartment, grinning at the sight of the love of his life. Her long gray hair flowed around her shoulders in soft curls and her face was well wrinkled with age, but he still thought she was lovely. He gently took her in his arms and kissed her sweetly, and then he winked and quickly dropped to his knees, a move that was shockingly agile for his age. He pushed up the bottom of her shirt to reveal the sparkling ring hanging from her remarkably toned stomach. His tongue came out and wound around the symbol of his love before dipping into her navel. Giving her one last key to her abdomen, he swiftly stood and took her in his arms. With a quick turn they disappeared. No one glanced twice at them as they strolled down the London street and entered the old telephone booth. No one was there to see them drop a series of small pebbles in the booth. No one noticed as the old man's cane left similar pebbles every time it struck the floor in front of an open flow, and again in front of all but one of the elevators. If someone had been watching, they would have been confused by the young and rather bland-looking couple that stepped out of that elevator at the very top floor of the ministry. But no one was watching, for it was 9:30 in the morning on a Thursday and everyone was hard at work, or at least pretending to look hard at work. They dropped some more pebbles in front of the door of the minister's office and continued on to the next. Each office, they would enter for some period of time. When they came back out, the girl would have added some new bracelets to her wrists and they would drop some more pebbles. Nearly 4 hours later, every room in the ministry was blocked off by the shields emanating from the small pebbles, and you could hear people pounding on doors on every floor. The only movement in any of the halls was the same couple calmly walking along and seeming to ignore the curse words hurled in their direction from every blocked doorway. The couple took the elevator back up to level 2. A pair of small children emerged and walked down to the door to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The boy dug a letter out of his pocket and then conjured a large box. The girl then proceeded to fill the box with the bracelets that were adorning both of her arms up to her shoulders. The pair then headed back to the elevator. As the doors were closing, the boy shot a spell out that dispelled the pebble-created shield. Instantly, Amelia Bones emerged, wand aloft, with half of her aura department. When she could see no one, her attention turned to the box overflowing with gaudy jewelry and a letter on top. She cast spell after spell at both, checking for tricks and traps. When she could find none, she levitated the letter and, giving a flick to open it in midair, peered at it closely. Madam Bones, as one of the few in this building with absolute integrity, we present our gift to you. Here are the bodies of the traitors that had worked for the ministry in one capacity or other. May you do better in the future. The children. February 12, 1998. Fred Weasley was grumbling under his breath. He was convinced that George had somehow managed to cheat in the coin toss to determine who got to be a boy and who was forced to be a girl. At least they were pretending to be young children, so being forced into this girl's body wasn't quite as uncomfortable as it might have been with an older body. But it was still bloody annoying. And by golly, he could already imagine what teasing George had devised for him over this situation. At least he and George got the privilege of helping Tonks and Harry out. He knew that they must have somehow earned the quiet young man's trust for this request to have come. Harry had never asked for help before. Since joining the Order, he and George had rarely been allowed to help in the actual fighting, but they were eager to nonetheless. Finally, it felt like they were able to make a real difference in the war efforts. Harry had stopped by last week and asked them to help, and then carefully laid out his plan in excruciating detail. They had been warned to be ready at a moment's notice. He had no idea how Tonks had known when and where the attack was happening today, but he did know that he and George were handed the polyjuice and the apparition coordinates through the flow and told they had 30 seconds to get there. They had already gone over the plan several times, and he didn't even have enough time to get nervous before they were leaving. When they arrived, they could see the feared visage of Lord Voldemort as he sneered down at the woman at his feet as he gleefully tortured her. What was the most shocking about the scene, however, was the fact that Voldemort was alone in his tormenting. He was not surrounded by followers as he had been every time the twins, or anyone they knew, had seen him previously. He guessed Tonks was right. Most of his followers had been taken care of by the mysterious children that Fred now knew to be Tonks and Harry in disguise, and the rest had probably run away scared. Fred was still in awe at their daring to take down Voldemort's entire army alone, but it was sheer genius to have done so as children. He didn't think he would have fared much better than the Death Eaters if faced with small children that could fight so well. The shock would have left him completely vulnerable. And it would be difficult to overcome his natural instincts when fighting a child. Even the ruthless Death Eaters would have trouble fighting correctly against what appeared to be innocent children. It seemed likely that Voldemort appearing himself tonight was to draw the children out to end them, and hence the reason he and George were polyjuiced into a random pair of children. Previously, the children were surprising and so it worked to their advantage. Tonight, children were expected, so he and his brother were providing the distraction. He and George simultaneously brought their wands up and attempted to engage the terrifying man before them, all the while praying that they could hold on long enough. The instant Voldemort's attention was focused wholly on the two children before him, the spell arched from seeming thin air at his back. Fred breathed a sigh of relief that Harry was there waiting for them like he had promised. He had no doubt that he and George would have been overwhelmed in moments. As a shimmer appeared in the air from the origin of the spell, which was still miraculously pumping into Voldemort, Fred had no idea what kind of spell could do that. Fred realized that he was wrong in his assumption. It was Tonks who was holding the wand at Voldemort. From behind him he heard a voice. "You had to know I would come for you, Tom." Fred nearly jumped out of his skin. That was the voice of Harry Potter, not Harry Lewis. He looked up as the familiar visage of his new friend Lewis morphed into the face of his old friend Potter and his jaw dropped. He knew that Harry seemed familiar. It didn't make any sense, as Harry had never shown any sign of being a metamorph, but it did answer the question about much of his odd behavior that had appeared recently, and the way he reacted to Ron and Hermione at the Burrow. Fred also now understood why he and George were trusted to help. Harry knew they could be trusted. Potter, you have come back now that someone else has been fighting your battle. Coward. Before Fred's eyes, Harry cycled through morph after morph, some children, some older. He started laughing softly. You have been fooled, Tom. I've been the one to fight the whole time. I have taken out all of your followers and you were none the wiser. I may have left when I had to, but I came back stronger than ever. And now I am going to finish this fight. Voldemort sneered, as his face seemed to be the only thing he could move in his body, still held in place by Tonks' spell. I am immortal, Potter. You will never win. So you think. Calmly, Harry raised his wand and shot an overpowered spell at Voldemort. It looked like a vanishing spell to Fred, but he could have sworn McGonagall told him that vanishing spells could never work on a person. But Voldemort certainly disappeared. Of course, he did so in a most unusual manner in that he disappeared one limb at a time until only his glaring head was left. Then with a final pop he was gone. Tonks was in Harry's arms so quickly Fred was sure she apparated there. Fred immediately looked to his twin, breathing a sigh of relief to find George perfectly hale though equally flabbergasted as himself. He turned back to the embracing couple. Harry? Fred asked carefully. Harry pulled his head away from where it was buried in Tonks' neck. Fred. George. Fred gaped at him. Is it really you? This whole time, it was you. Why didn't you say anything? He was unable to keep the hurt from his face. It was better for me to remain gone. Look around you, if they had known it was me, do you think I could have kept Ron and Hermione away? Instead they get to enjoy what is left of their youth. I did this for them. Fred considered this for a few minutes and acknowledged that it made sense, in a typical Harry way. Are you going to tell them now? George asked. No, I wasn't going to tell anyone, but we needed your help to distract him today. Thank you for that, by the way. I hope that in time Ron and Hermione can become friends with Harry Lewis, but I accept that we will never be as close. To me, their safety is worth that loss. They will never again have to deal with the notoriety that has always followed me around. I am happy being Harry Lewis for the rest of my life. Harry looked at them both carefully. Can you keep this to yourself? Fred looked across at George and they shared a look. They both knew that if they answered no, they might never see either Harry again. Together the brothers nodded, and George explained. We will always be your friends, Harry, no matter what face you wear. And we can see how much happier you are without the attention. We will keep quiet. Thank you for trusting us with your secret. Harry smiled in thanks. Thank you. He looked around and his body visibly relaxed. Well, it is over. I suppose we should tell someone. I'll write a letter to Madame Bones, Harry. Tonks spoke from his arms. She turned to the twins. If you would pass along the message to Dumbledore, that will be enough. Fred nodded and George stepped up, clapping Harry on the back. It is good to have you back, brother. You take whatever time you need for yourself, just know that you are always welcome. Harry nodded and with a twist, he and Tonks disappeared. Fred looked over at his twin. Well, that was a shock. Quite. He has changed a lot more than his face in the last 2 years. Yes. Good thing we like him just as much as a Lewis as we did when he was a Potter. Do you think he's right? Is it better that no one knows who he is? I understand why he doesn't want most people to know, but I do think he is making a mistake with his closest friends. Should we say something? No. Right. It's his choice. Maybe he'll change his mind. But we'll still be his friend even if he doesn't. Of course. February 17, 1998. Harry looked out across the water. The yacht was exactly the escape they needed. They had set sail from England the day after Voldemort was dealt with, and with the aid of several rather ingenious spells were now thoroughly alone on the water. They were both enjoying doing basically nothing for days on end. Harry idly thought about where they should go. He wanted to get married soon and Tonks deserved somewhere amazing and romantic. Paris. No, Italy. She had always talked about visiting Italy. That was it. With a wave of his wand, He turned the boat slightly and set a new course. He glanced over to where Tonks was sunbathing. Complete nude. He knew that she was doing so entirely for him, as she could easily give herself a tan. He was certainly appreciative of the lovely view. Maybe it was time for a break from the wheel, he could do with his own tan. February 25, 1998. Harry was relaxing on the deck with the anchor down, Tonks at his side. They were slowly rounding the boot of Italy and were right on track to reach Venice in about a week, but he was in no rush. He and Tonks were both enjoying working on their full-body tans, and the less time he spent driving the boat the more time he could spend enjoying his fiancée. He looked up and smiled as Hedwig swooped down to land on the railing. She had been out hunting all night. A series of high-pitched hoots erupted and 5 little owlets scampered out to see her. 2 were pure white and the other 3 were a dark gray with small white stripes. She had appeared with her brood as they were sailing past France, giving him an imperious look. Harry figured this was her solution to the problem of her inability to deliver his mail. He had no idea who the father was, but was willing to bet Hedwig had simply found the best mail she could and then promptly ignored him after he served his purpose. Harry was leaning towards keeping one of the small striped ones. He had taken a liking to the smallest one. That was if Hedwig agreed. On second thought, maybe he should let her pick. March 2, 1998. Venice, Italy. The ancient elder smiled at the sight before him. He had married thousands of couples in his 213 years on Earth, but this one was certainly unique. They both had hair and eyes that were cycling through so many colors it was almost enough to give him a headache. He assumed their overwhelming happiness was causing them to lose control of their magic a bit, but it certainly made for an interesting ceremony. It was also a lovely ending to his career. He just might retire and spend the rest of his days in quieter pursuits. He thought it might be fun to write a book on various types of marriage bonds. And to have an entire chapter dedicated to the bond used by the young couple before him. They had come to him 2 days ago requesting a deeper bonding than was traditionally performed, and he had found an ancient ceremony once used by the Egyptian mages. He wondered if they would be willing to satisfy his curiosity on the consequences of such a bond after they had been married for a bit. July 23, 2013. Harry looked on fondly as his 5-year-old son moved around the room as he told his story to his adopted uncles, Remus, Fred and George. The boy had an amazing imagination for coming up with tales. And they were even better because Jimmy would adopt the visage and voice of each of his characters in turn. This one was particularly amusing as he was telling a modified version of the classic Little Red Riding Hood, and he had managed to turn himself into a fairly realistic wolf. The fact that he could talk while wearing such a look was less disconcerting than the fact that he could do it in the first place. Harry had coined a new term for his son. He didn't think calling him a metamorph was accurate, so he had taken to calling him a chameleon. His son could become anyone and anything he wanted. He looked down at the sleeping bundle in his arms. He idly wondered if little Liliana would have the same ability. He smiled softly as she blinked her eyes open. It took a second for them to focus on him, and then her green was overtaken by silver to match his own. Lily's abilities had started showing themselves only yesterday, and already they were rivaling her brothers. Of course, she was only 3 days old. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.